Lloyd was just a boy when his entire village was destroyed by collateral damage during a battle against the Demon King. From the empty look in his eyes, it was evident that he had witnessed things far too traumatizing for someone so young. When Merlin found him standing there among the ruins, she was overcome by a deep sense of guilt, because that destruction had been caused by her mistake, by her negligence. To atone for her own sin, Merlin decided to take him in and bring him to live with her, offering him a new home. While he lived under her care, she also decided to train him in the paths of magic. The first spell Merlin tried to teach Lloyd was the flame spell. Her teaching method, however, was anything but gentle. She showed the spell for about 3 seconds, and then said, "Figure it out yourself. If you cannot do it, you will go without dinner." Against all her expectations, when night fell, Lloyd finally managed to create a small flame in his hand. However, when he showed the result to Merlin, instead of praising him, she mocked the weak fire he had created. She called it pathetic and even burned his eyebrows with a wall of flames for not doing his best. Even so, she allowed him to have dinner, since he had managed to learn the spell. The next day, Merlin changed the focus of the training and told Lloyd that he would learn water magic. She made a small demonstration, dragging her foot across the ground and creating a small jet of water. Then, she asked Lloyd to do the same, but after trying, all he managed to do was leave the ground a little wet. Even so, he felt quite proud of the result. Merlin, however, was not impressed at all and poured a huge amount of water over him, just to show what real magic looks like. As time went by, Lloyd training continued like that, he giving his all to learn, and Merlin punishing him whenever she thought his performance was not enough. Even so, her methods ended up proving extremely effective, because when winter arrived, Lloyd's magical ability had already evolved so much that he could create a perfect snow sculpture. And all of that with just a single finger gesture. The gesture was so thoughtful that Merlin actually appreciated it, but did not want to break character. So, she took control of the snow sculpture and made it grow to about 9 meters in height and grabbed Lloyd with it, showing him what real snow manipulation truly was. Soon after, the entire sculpture collapsed and Lloyd slammed into the ground. By that point, the two already got along very well, and as soon as Lloyd managed to dig himself out of the snow, he told Merlin that he would work even harder in his magical training, and she simply smiled in response. More time passed, and one morning, Merlin was lying on the couch, suffering from a terrible hangover from having drunk too much the night before. Lloyd went to her and asked how she was, but Merlin replied that she felt awful, and wanting to help. Lloyd placed his hand on her forehead and activated his white magic to ease the hangover. Just a few seconds later, Merlin was already feeling much better, and she sat beside Lloyd and hugged him, thanking him for healing her. But as soon as she regained her strength, she said that it was already time to return to training. The poor guy does not get a single second of rest. She dragged the boy outside, and things continued like that for several years, until one day Merlin received a book by mail that left her extremely worried. At that moment, Lloyd knocked on the door to say that dinner was ready. Merlin said she would be there soon, and tried to put the book away quickly. However, she ended up dropping it right in front of Lloyd, and he bent down to pick it up, and the instant his hands touched the book, an absurd amount of information flooded his mind all at once. Lloyd passed out due to the sudden overload of data. When Merlin realized what had happened, she was completely shocked, because that proved that Lloyd possessed the abilities of the Chosen One. For now, she took him to bed so he could rest, but if Lloyd truly was the Chosen One, she could not allow him to make the same mistakes she had made in the past. Merlin kissed his forehead and, with a soft glow, remained there while she cast a spell, determined not to allow Lloyd to become arrogant with his own power, just as she herself had once been. The next day, Lloyd training continued, but this time, Merlin took him to the forest so that he could practice his white magic. Lloyd uses his magic on a single fruit, causing it to ripen instantly. Merlin praises him for having done a good job, but also wants to show him that he still has a long road ahead. That is when she places her hand on the trunk of a tree and uses white magic to make the entire tree grow lush, full of life. Later that night, Merlin helps Lloyd study and explains that there are some orcs capable of using rare magic that allows them to control monsters. While reading, Lloyd comes across something called ancestral magic, but the instant he mentions it, Merlin's mood changes completely. She interrupts him and firmly says that he does not need to learn ancestral magic. Other lessons from Merlin involve learning how to summon his own magic staff as quickly as possible. However, since Lloyd is still unable to do it fast enough, she knocks him down with her own staff. Then, she says that he must never neglect his training, no matter how powerful he may become. Lloyd promises that he will always be diligent, and the next lesson involves learning about magic stones. Merlin explains that they are a crystallized form of magic, and that their power is capable of even transforming surrounding objects into magic stones. Some years then pass, and one day, during one of the lessons, Merlin takes Lloyd to the middle of nowhere. She hands him a knife and says that he needs to survive in that forest and find his way back on his own. Then, she leaves before Lloyd can even protest, leaving him completely alone. As soon as Merlin leaves, a white wolf appears and immediately attacks Lloyd. He runs desperately and ends up climbing a tree to hide from the wolf. Lloyd does not believe that the magic of a white mage like him is enough to defeat a monster of that level, so his only option is to try to return home, avoiding any confrontation with monsters along the way. However, when using magic to take a look at the surrounding area and discover where to go, Lloyd realizes that he is very far from home, and with no alternatives, he begins to move slowly through the forest. When night falls, he spends his time studying spells to improve them as much as possible. Several days pass like this, until at a certain moment, Lloyd accidentally steps on a dry branch, alerting a giant spider to his presence. He panics and runs in the opposite direction, using an acceleration spell to increase his speed. In that way, he manages to escape the creature, and in the end, Lloyd manages to return home safely. He collapses from exhaustion right in front of the door, and when Merlin sees it, she becomes extremely proud that he managed to return on his own. A few more years pass, and one day, while Lloyd is cleaning the house, he notices a book about a city on top of Merlin's table. Out of curiosity, he asks if he can borrow it, and she says that he can keep the book. By this point, Lloyd had already completed practically all of his training, so he no longer needed to deal with Merlin's constant lesson. However, now every other day, she dragged him to help her develop new magic. Since Lloyd's talent for creating and refining spells was exceptional, he was happy to finally be treated as an equal, but he had gone a week without sleeping properly, because Merlin forced him to stay awake for entire nights due to her magical research. Tired of so much constant pressure, and still extremely curious about what life would be like in a city, Lloyd ends up making a drastic decision. The next morning, Merlin goes up to Lloyd's room to ask for his help in yet another magical research. But to her surprise, he is not there. And upon reading the book about the city left on her table, she quickly understands where Lloyd went. As Lloyd finishes arriving in the city, he is completely amazed as he walks through the busy streets. This is the first time in his life that he sees a place like this. After buying a simple piece of bread, he is already out of money, understanding that he needs to find a job as soon as possible. Luckily, an adventurer recruitment poster flies straight into his face. Lloyd decides to sign up. And during all this time, a mysterious man had been observing Lloyd from a distance. Apparently, he was quite intrigued by his choices. After registering as an adventurer, Lloyd follows his new group to the top of a castle to face a giant cyclops. The leader of the group, Alien, asks the healer Shanna to heal him. However, at the exact moment Shanna prepares to cast the spell, Lloyd silently conjures his refined attribute enhancement magic, making everyone feel better than ever. Even so, no one notices that Lloyd was the one responsible, since he says nothing. After the enhancement, the archer shoots the Cyclops, and the knight blocks one of its attacks, and is sincerely shocked by how easy it was. Alien, in turn, does not question for even a second the sudden increase in his strength, and defeats the Cyclops with a single blow, completely convinced that everything was his own merit. Even so, the knight seems to have noticed that Lloyd had something to do with that increase in power. With the Cyclops defeated, the group returns to the city, and Alan begins to be praised as a hero, since a monster of that level is considered so powerful that no one else in the city had been able to defeat it. As expected, the reward for defeating the Cyclops was enormous, and even so, he gives only 5 coins to Lloyd, saying that the low payment is due to the fact that he is still a rank D adventurer. Lloyd accepts the money without complaining, but when Alan suggests a toast to the group's victory, he apologizes and walks away, making it clear that he does not want to take part. The group's mage is offended by the fact that Lloyd does not want to drink with them. However, Alan says that it is not a problem, since they can always hire another white mage, and besides that, Lloyd had not contributed that much to the group's performance anyway. Little did they know. Meanwhile, back at Merlin's house, a man who had been observing Lloyd earlier appears. Merlin asks if he has any news about the boy, and Will replies that Lloyd has reached the city and ended up joining the heroes group. Upon hearing this, Merlin feels relieved to know that Lloyd is safe. For her, it was already time for him to go out into the world and experience things on his own, as long as he did not become arrogant like she once had. She believes that he will be just fine, Will then asks whether Merlin still regrets what happened on that day. Her lips tighten in contempt for herself as she remembers everything she did. At that time, the Demon King was willing to self-destruct in order to take possession of a magic book, something that even Merlin could not foresee. As a consequence, an entire village was obliterated, killing everyone around in an instant, including Merlin herself. Fortunately, one of her party members, Sybil, managed to use a powerful ancient magic to resurrect everyone who died in the Demon King's explosion. However, this cost him his own life, and Merlin has carried that guilt ever since. Returning to Lloyd's adventures, he is still part of the heroes group, and whenever Alan or the others face difficulty, Lloyd discreetly casts strengthening spells to make the battle easier. Thanks to him, the group maintains a perfect record, always fighting at the peak of their abilities, never realizing how much Lloyd is carrying the team on his back. Later that night, Hina is reading about defensive techniques when Alan staggers into her room to see what she is doing. She says that she is just curious, since the monster's attacks have not been causing as much impact on her shield lately, and she does not understand the reason. Alan admits that he has been feeling much stronger in recent times, but believes that this is the result of his natural talent. However, Hina remembers that he has not been training much recently, so there is no reason for him to have suddenly become stronger. Meanwhile, that same night, in a forest, a group of guards is finishing their night patrol, when suddenly one of them screams in pain. The other guard looks up and sees a giant golem standing before him. At that moment, he realizes that he will probably die right there, all because of a poorly paid job. The next morning, the captain of the guard meets with Alan to ask for his help. He explains that the guards were on night patrol when they were brutally killed. Alan accepts the request immediately, believing that defeating a golem will be extremely easy. Later that day, the group heads to the site of the attack, and thanks to Lloyd's tracking magic, they manage to locate the golem in a cave behind a waterfall. As Lloyd continues to support everyone, they defeat the golem with ease. However, a demon appears nearby and creates another golem from the rocks in the cave's ceiling. Lloyd observes the demon more closely, and realizes that he is using his own staff as a magic stone to control the golem. These magic stones are extremely dangerous, and knowing that he needs to act quickly before something goes wrong, Lloyd takes control of the situation. He casts a precision enhancement spell, and orders Lulu to fire an arrow at the demon. Lulu is surprised by Lloyd's sudden order, especially since the demon is hidden behind a device. Even so, she fires, and somehow, the arrow hits the target. Next, Lloyd orders Mia to teleport the staff to him, and as soon as the object reaches his hands, he casts a spell to seal its power. Alan begins to grow irritated upon seeing Lloyd giving orders to the others, when, theoretically, he should be the leader of the group. Trying to reaffirm his authority, Alan moves forward to deliver the final blow to the golem. Lloyd does not want to let him die, so he casts an acceleration spell on himself so that he can run and push Alan out of the way, just moments before the golem nearly crushes his head. Even so, Alan does not even acknowledge what Lloyd has just done, and instead, he yells at him for getting in his way. Shortly after, Alan defeats the golem, and when everyone returns to the city, he dismisses Lloyd for considering him irritating. Alan also accuses him of being lazy and of never doing anything to help the group. Because of all those years listening to Merlin say that his abilities were never good enough, Lloyd naturally believes that the problem is himself. Without making a scene, he accepts leaving the group. In the following days, he tries to find a new group to join, but the task is quite difficult, because most of them are already full, and white mages are not very sought after. However, as luck likes to play with fate, a girl named Iui is desperately in need of a white mage. As soon as she finds Lloyd, she grabs his hand and begs him to join her group. Inui drags Lloyd to meet the other members of her group, and everyone is surprised to see her return so quickly. They assume that she was unable to find a new white mage, since it would be practically impossible for her to find one in such a short time. However, to everyone's surprise, Iui points to Lloyd and says that he is the new member of the group. There is only one small problem with all of this. Iui brought Lloyd there without explaining anything at all, so he never agreed to join the group in the first place. The others already had the feeling that it was too good to be true, and they tell Iui that perhaps it would be better to give up on the mission they had accepted, since they would not be able to complete it even with a white mage, and there was no guarantee that Lloyd would be strong enough to replace Crumb. Everyone seems to agree that proceeding with that mission in their current state would be far too risky, but Iui does not want to disappoint the client, because she truly needs the help. Lloyd does not know all the details of the situation, but he realizes that the mission is important, so he suggests that perhaps it would be better to let another group handle it. However, they say that there is no one else available. The mission is rank A, which means that only rank A groups or higher can accept it. But all groups of that level in the capital are already out on other missions. Iyui's group is rank S, so they meet the requirement. However, since their usual white mage is no longer with them, they need to find a replacement. Unfortunately, according to the guild's rules, groups can only work with people officially registered as members, so they cannot simply borrow a white mage from another group. And finding an independent one in such a short time is practically impossible. Lloyd even wants to help, but he believes that he is not strong enough to be useful to a rankus group. Before he can say anything else, Iyui states with confidence that everything will be fine as long as Lloyd is on the team. They end up taking Lloyd to an open field, since they need to evaluate his abilities before he can officially join the group. Although, once again, Lloyd never agreed to any of this. Iyui then asks him to demonstrate his power, and Lloyd becomes quite apprehensive, thinking that his abilities will probably disappoint them, since they are rank S, just like his master. Daggers intervenes, saying that it is not fair to put Lloyd in that situation, and demand that he show his power out of nowhere. However, if Iyui really wants to conduct a test, she should at least specify which spell he is supposed to use. Daggers is right, so Iyui tells Lloyd that he needs to cast enhancement magic on all of them. Lloyd is shocked, because that sounds far too easy to be a test for a rankus group. Just to be sure, he asks whether she truly wants him to use strengthening magic on everyone. Iyui confirms that she does, but makes it clear that she wants him to do it on all of them at the same time. This confuses Lloyd even more, because he has already done that many times on many different targets. That has never been a problem for him. So how could that be considered a test? At first, he thinks that there must be some hidden requirement they are not mentioning. But no, all they want is for him to cast that spell. To be honest, they even think that this might be too difficult for him. They ask whether Lloyd can do it, and he answers that he can, although he still does not understand why the test is so easy. Lloyd then summons his staff and begins to cast enhancement magic. However, Iyui is more focused on the fact that he simply summoned his staff out of nowhere. She asks where it came from, and Lloyd explains that it is just a basic storage spell, nothing special. Then he asks what Iyui thought of the strengthening magic he cast on her. Iyui had not even noticed that Lloyd had already used the spell, but thinking about it more carefully, she really does feel a little stronger than usual. The others also feel the effects, although it seems different from ordinary enhancement magic. Curious, Iyui draws her sword to test it, and she delivers a practice swing against a tree, and even without putting force into it, she cuts the trunk in half with extreme ease. Iyui can hardly believe what she has just done, but Lloyd thinks that this is completely normal for the level of enhancement he applied. Iyui and the others were only expecting a boost in strength, but Lloyd thought that would be far too simple, and also applied improvements to defense, speed, mana, and vitality to all of them. After seeing what Lloyd is capable of, the others are left completely speechless, simply staring at him in silence for a few seconds. Lloyd interprets this silence as disappointment and assumes that he did something wrong. He apologizes for wasting their time, saying that they clearly do not want a white mage like him in their group. But before Lloyd can leave, Iyui calls him back, because she cannot let someone that talented simply walk away. Iyui wants to know more about Lloyd, so she begins asking several questions, and ends up discovering that he was once part of the hero's party. She considers this a huge deal, since the hero's party is famous throughout the entire kingdom. But Lloyd says that he was expelled supposedly for not having enough power, so he believes that he was not very useful to them. Daggers and the others say that this makes no sense at all, because they have never seen anyone cast so many different types of enhancement magic at the same time. Even so, Lloyd is convinced that there must be many people in the world who are stronger than him. He tells Iyui and the others that it would be better to simply convince the group's former white mage to return. But that is not an option for Iyui's group, since Crumb, the group's former white mage, has a younger sister who is gravely ill. Until recently, Crumb took care of her sister every day while continuing to work as an adventurer. But that ended up wearing her down significantly, to the point where she could no longer focus properly on the battlefield. And that is why she decided to step away from the group. Everyone knows that Crumb only left because she did not want to become a burden to her companions, and no one there wanted to see her go. But they had to respect her decision. That is why they have been searching for a white mage to replace her and fill her position. Normally, they would take on this mission even without a white mage, but rank A missions are especially difficult without a dedicated healer. Lloyd realizes how much everyone cares about Crumb and would like to help if possible, so he asks what exactly her sister is suffering from. Ijui does not know many details, but she knows that it is a disease that turns Crumb's sister's body into magic stone. Lloyd remembers reading that these stones can also turn other things into magic stones, and ever since then he has been trying to find a way to reverse this process, because he believes he might be able to help. So he asks Ijui to take him to Crumb's house, and shortly after, they arrive at the location. Crumb is quite surprised to see Ijui accompanied by a stranger, but she ends up letting them in to talk. Lloyd apologizes in advance, knowing that what he is about to ask may sound a bit rude, but he wants to know all the details of how Crumb's sister fell ill. Crumb does not mind explaining what happened, and she tells them that she and her sister Sylvie used to go on adventures together all the time. However, during a specific mission, Sylvie ended up getting injured, and since then she has remained unconscious. Ijui asks whether it was a monster that injured Sylvie, but honestly, Crumb does not know, because when Sylvie was found, she had already passed out. Lloyd then asks about Sylvie's symptoms, but Crumb thinks it will be faster to simply show them the situation. She leads Ijui and Lloyd to the door of Sylvie's bedroom, but warns them to prepare themselves because they may not be ready for what they are about to see. As soon as Crumb opens the door, Lloyd and Ijui are hit by an extremely unpleasant wave of mana. All of it is emanating from Sylvie. Crumb pulls back the blankets from her sister's body and reveals that her arms and feet have already begun to transform. It is the first time Lloyd has seen this in person, so he is shocked by the severity of the situation. For some reason, Sylvie's mana has completely gone out of control, causing her body to gradually transform into magic stones. It is only a matter of time until she is completely consumed. Lloyd asks Crumb to allow him to examine Sylvie because there is something he would like to test. If his hypotheses are correct, he might be able to cure her. Crumb finds it hard to believe Lloyd, since not even the best healers in the kingdom were able to do anything for her. Lloyd explains that Sylvie's condition is most likely the result of having been pierced by a high-purity magic stone. He asks whether the cave where Sylvie was injured had a very high mana density. Crumb confirms that it did. In fact, the mission that day was precisely to collect magic stones from that cave, which is probably related to what happened. Lloyd asks Crumb to show him where Sylvie's wound is. When she points it out, Lloyd confirms what he suspected. A magic stone must have penetrated Sylvie's body through the wound, and it is the mana from that stone that is causing the transformation. So far, all of Lloyd's deductions have proven correct, so Ijui asks Crumb to trust him, since he may be able to perform the procedure and save Sylvie's life. When everything is ready, Lloyd begins casting a spell to directly drain the mana from Sylvie's body. However, absorbing all that dark energy starts to take a heavy toll on him. Sylvie's illness caused by the mana collapses due to the influence of the magic stone. Therefore, if Lloyd wants to return her to a normal state, he needs to remove as much mana as possible from her body. At the same time, he must be careful not to kill her from mana exhaustion, so he plans to heal her while draining her energy simultaneously. Lloyd begins to conjure the spells, but Crumb does not recognize the healing spell he is using and asks if there is something different about it. Lloyd explains that he needs to give a destination to the enormous amount of excess energy he is absorbing from Sylvie's body, so he is using an inferior version of healing magic to burn off that energy, since that variation of the spell consumes a large amount of mana. Ijui does not really understand the technical terms used by white mages, so she asks Crumb whether what Lloyd is doing is truly impressive. However, impressive does not even come close to describing what he is accomplishing. It is practically a miracle. He is using a spell that he created himself, and on his own, he is casting two different types of magic at the same time, which by itself would already be absurd. On top of that, he possesses a level of willpower far beyond that of any ordinary person. As Lloyd continues the healing, the stone transformation on Sylvie's body begins to recede. When he finally finishes, she returns completely to normal. It was an enormous effort, so Lloyd is left quite breathless after completing the process. Shortly afterward, Sylvie finally awakens, and Crumb is deeply moved upon seeing her younger sister finally awake and conscious. With tears in her eyes, Crumb thanks Lloyd and Ijui for everything they have done for her. However, now that Sylvie has recovered, Crumb intends to return to adventuring alongside her sister. Ijui is disappointed to learn that Crumb will not be returning to the group, but she understands that Crumb needs to remain by Sylvie's side. Thus, Ijui says her goodbyes and walks down the hallway. Lloyd also prepares to leave, but before that, Crumb calls out to him and asks that he take good care of her group in her place. Lloyd replies that he is not even an official member yet, and believes himself to be too weak to truly be useful. Crumb does not understand why Lloyd calls himself weak, but tells him to let his heart make that decision. Later that night, Yui and Lloyd tell the other group members that Sylvie has been cured. Everyone praises Lloyd for his work. However, since Crumb made it clear that she will not be returning, the group will need to reevaluate their next steps as a team. In the short time he has spent with them, Lloyd has grown fond of everyone and realizes that they truly care about one another, unlike what happened in the heroes' party. A bit nervous, he asks whether they would still accept him as the group's healer. They are very happy, since everyone had been strongly hoping that he would agree to join them, so the news is received with great enthusiasm. To celebrate, Lloyd officially joins the group. Then Ayui says that he can eat as much as he wants that night, because they will cover the bill. That ends up being the kindest gesture anyone has made toward Lloyd since he arrived in the city. He then starts eating non-stop, devouring plate after plate, delighted by the taste of the food. The others do not understand why he is praising it so much, since that food is considered merely average by the city's standards. Lloyd, on the other hand, he cannot believe that such complex flavors are considered common, which makes him question the food he used to eat when he was a child. When they ask what kind of food he ate before, Lloyd explains that he basically lived on mushrooms and herbs that his master grew in the garden, accompanied by meat hunted in the forest. The problem is that his master has culinary skills equivalent to someone who considers salt to be something spicy, so everything she made ended up being extremely bad. Then Yui asks Lloyd to talk more about what his master was like, since, setting the cooking aside, if she was capable of teaching him such impressive magic, she must be an extraordinary person. Silica asks whether Lloyd's master is also a white mage like him, but Lloyd admits that he never actually asked before leaving home. Still, if he had to guess, he would say that she is a combat-focused mage, considering the number of explosions she used to cause. Silica is surprised to learn that someone who is not a white mage managed to teach white magic to Lloyd and comments that, if possible, she would really like to train with his master. Lloyd, however, immediately cuts off that idea, saying that she would be much better off not meeting his master, because after all the pain and suffering he went through during training with Merlin, he would not wish that suffering on anyone. That does not mean he dislikes his master, only that her methods were a bit excessive. She was extremely strict in her lessons and also showed great kindness on many occasions, so Lloyd knows that deep down she truly cared about him. After this celebratory meal, Yui reminds everyone that they still need to define a strategy for the mission. Before that, however, it would be better to explain the mission details to Lloyd. Yui then takes out the mission notice, and Daggers explains that the objective is to deal with a group of monsters that have been destroying farms in the region recently. The local residents cannot drive them off on their own, and apparently there are several different species of monsters moving together, something that is practically unheard of. Given how strange the situation is, there is no way to predict what will happen. Even so, as adventurers, Yui believes it is their duty to help people who are in danger. Lloyd agrees with her. As for the battle plan, Yui and Daggers would not be very effective in direct combat against a huge horde of monsters, so they will have to rely on Silica's large area magic to defeat the creatures. However, casting magic over such a wide area consumes a lot of mana, and Silica fears she may not be able to eliminate all the monsters, depending on the size of the horde. Yui asks Lloyd whether he can use any offensive spells. He replies that he knows a few, but he does not believe that the spells of a white mage like himself would be as effective as Silica's combat magic. Even so, they still need to put together a solid plan. Daggers then suggests that he and Yui advance on the front line in order to draw the monsters' attention, and when they begin to chase them, he will lead them to a single point, where Silica can deliver the finishing blow. Cross, on the other hand, will be responsible for protecting Silica while she casts her spell. Lloyd will be in charge of providing magical support to Kiri. Silica gets excited about the idea of receiving support from Lloyd, since she knows how absurdly strong his enhancements are. Lloyd, on the other hand, still does not understand why everyone looks at him with such admiration. At first, Yui thought he was simply being humble, but now she realizes that Lloyd truly has no idea how strong he is. Because of that, she tells him that he should trust his own abilities a bit more. Lloyd remembers that he was expelled from the heroes' party for supposedly not having enough power, so he cannot be that good. The group still cannot understand what kind of idiots would call Lloyd weak, but they make it clear that they fully trust his abilities, and Lloyd feels very happy when he hears that. After finishing the strategy meeting, everyone leaves and agrees to meet the next morning to begin the mission. They start walking together toward the inn, but Daggers notices that Lloyd is heading in the opposite direction and goes over to ask where he is going. A little embarrassed, Lloyd admits that he does not have enough money to pay for an inn, so he has been sleeping under a bridge since he arrived in the city. Daggers refuses to allow a friend to sleep under such conditions, so he hands Lloyd a pouch of coins and tells him to accept it. Lloyd tries to refuse, but Daggers insists, telling him to think of it as just a temporary loan that can be repaid in the future when Lloyd receives his share of the mission reward. Extremely grateful, Lloyd promises that he will work hard to pay the money back, and Dagash tells him to stop talking nonsense and go straight to the inn. That night, Lloyd sleeps in a bed for the first time in a very long while, feeling immense gratitude. To him, his new companions are incredibly kind people. The next morning, Lloyd and the others gather in front of Yui's house to prepare for the mission. As soon as Yui finishes getting ready, she comes out to join the group. However, upon seeing everyone standing there without any luggage, Yui becomes confused, since missions of this kind normally require a lot of equipment. The others explain that Lloyd helped them by using storage magic to store all of their belongings, so no one would need to carry them. Lloyd offers to do the same for Yui, and after her bag is stored away, she thanks him, saying that carrying that kind of baggage always makes trips very tiring. Lloyd comments that he can teach them how to use storage magic if they want, since it is not something particularly complicated. The others are surprised, since they did not even know that ordinary people could learn something like that. Lloyd explains that everyone is born with at least a small amount of mana, so it is possible to learn storage magic, although a great deal of training is required to increase the spell's capacity. Even if their storage space never comes close to his, it still seemed to be extremely useful. Excited by the idea, they ask Lloyd to teach them, and he gladly agrees. Not long after, the group begins their journey, and while crossing the plains, they eventually reach a border with the demon nation. For now, the demons are quiet, so everything seems relatively peaceful, but no one knows when they might try to conquer the continent once again. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, a hooded man performs a clearly malevolent ritual, something that will certainly cause problems in the future. Lloyd and the others reach the first point of the journey much earlier than expected, so they decide to set up camp near the river. Lloyd takes out the equipment so they can camp, and everyone works together to set up the tents and prepare the fire for the night. The process ends up taking some time, and when they finish, Yui is exhausted from all the effort. She asks Daga if she can already take a bath in the river, but he replies that there is still work to do, since Yui needs to gather firewood for dinner. Lloyd offers to collect the firewood in her place, and Yui thanks him. She grabs Silka by the hand and drags her to the river so they can bathe together. A little later, Lloyd is in the forest, gathering dry branches, and when he has collected enough, he prepares to return to the camp. At that moment, he hears a scream coming from the nearby water. Yui and Silka were bathing, but they did not expect to encounter a bossalos in the middle of the river. To make matters worse, both of them were unarmed, and if Lloyd did not do something quickly, they would be devoured. Lloyd slides down the slope and throws a small fireball to draw the monster's attention. While the creature is distracted, he tells Yui and Silka to swim to the shore. At the same time, he pulls their weapons from his storage and throws them toward them, in addition to casting enhancement spells on both of them. Now ready to fight, Yui leaps forward and cuts off the creature's head with a single strike. Next, Silka shouts for Lloyd and Yui to move away, because she is going to cast a spell. They jump out of range, and Silka fires a fireball that incinerates all the remaining ones at once. Silka is shocked by the destructive power of the spell, since she had never managed something like that before. However, Lloyd does not mention that he cast an enhancement spell on her moments earlier, so Silka truly has no idea what happened. Amid all this confusion, at a certain moment, Yui's towel ends up falling right in front of Lloyd, a detail she prefers to pretend never happened. Back at the camp, to distract his mind, Lloyd begins teaching everyone how to use storage magic. He explains that they need to use their hands to open a hole in space where they can store their belongings. In practice, this is very far from being as easy as Lloyd makes it seem, but even so, everyone decides to try. As expected, no one manages to make it work on the first attempt, and Lloyd starts to think that he is a terrible teacher. Daggers, however, assures him that his explanations were perfect, and that they just need time, since they are beginners. At that moment, Silka has an idea. She tries to cast the spell with an incantation, and when she does so, her storage space actually opens. Then, the others realize that their mistake was trying to cast the spell silently, as Lloyd does. So, trying once more, Now, with incantations, everyone manages to open their own storage spaces, although they still need a great deal of practice to master them. Later that night, after dinner, Lloyd is sitting near a campfire when Yui approaches to talk. She thanks him for joining the group, but he says there is no need, since he was looking for a group to join anyway. Yui still feels a bit guilty for having pressured him into joining, but Lloyd knows that she only acted that way because she was desperate to complete the mission. Taking advantage of the topic, Lloyd asks Yui why she is so personally involved in this mission, since he finds it rather strange for someone to care so much about a place with which they have no direct connection. Yui explains that it reminds her of her hometown, because when she was a child, her village was attacked by monsters. She was the sole survivor of the massacre, and it is something that caused her great trauma that she carries throughout her life. Because of that, she cannot simply ignore it when this happens to another village. At that moment, Lloyd hears a very strange sound coming from nearby. He asks Yui to go wake the others, because they need to move immediately. Shortly afterward, a large group of medium-sized spiders begins marching through the forest. At first, the group manages to remain hidden, avoiding confrontation. However, Yui accidentally steps on a branch, alerting all the spiders to their presence. Everyone draws their weapons and prepares to fight, but almost immediately one of the spiders manages to grab Silka's staff and hurl it to the top of a tree, preventing her from casting any more offensive spells. The situation begins to grow critical, so Lloyd takes command and says he has a plan. First, he casts enhancement spells on everyone to increase their abilities and sends Yui to hold the spiders on the front line. Next, he asks Croix to retrieve Silka's staff. As soon as the staff is back in Silka's hands, Lloyd instructs her and Croix to combine their attacks to finish off the spiders. Lloyd's plan works perfectly. He feels relieved that everyone is safe. Even so, Lloyd begins to worry about having given orders like that and thinks he may have overstepped his bounds. He apologizes for commanding the group without being the leader, but no one minds. On the contrary, everyone acknowledges that Lloyd is extremely competent and that his orders were decisive. In fact, they would like him to take command whenever they find themselves in a dangerous situation. The next morning, everyone packs up the camp, and after storing all the equipment, they prepare to continue the journey. Lloyd, however, remains deep in thought, unable to shake the feeling that the encounter with the spiders the previous night was not mere coincidence. In the following days, Lloyd takes on the responsibility of standing guard in case something similar happens again. However, the others begin to worry, since it is not healthy for him to spend nights without sleep. They insist on resuming rotating watch shifts, but Lloyd assures them that he is fine that way. He is already used to staying up all night. He believes that, considering how mediocre his abilities are, this is the only way to truly contribute to the group. This could not be further from the truth, and everyone knows it. Even after so many attempts to show him that his abilities are extraordinary, Lloyd remains completely oblivious to it. Faced with this, Siyuka asks them to drop the subject, at least for now, so that everyone can rest. The next morning, the group resumes the journey, and Yui grows increasingly worried about Lloyd's lack of confidence. Then, upon seeing him silently casting a spell, she approaches and asks what he is doing. Lloyd explains that he is using a simple detection spell to check if there are any monsters nearby. But there is nothing simple about it, since detection magic is so rare that Yui had never met anyone capable of using it. For Lloyd, however, this is nothing worth mentioning. He comments that its range is not even that large, just a few kilometers, and that it would be safer to use this ability periodically for the rest of the journey to ensure that the area is safe. Yui agrees that the magic would make the journey much safer, but she worries that using something so advanced so frequently might be too great a burden for Lloyd. She asks if there is anything they can do to help him, but Lloyd replies that he can handle everything on his own, so her help is not necessary. Later that same night, Lloyd remains awake once again, standing watch. Inside the tent, Yui and Silka begin to wonder whether Lloyd perhaps does not trust them. They know that he is extremely incapable, but until now he has refused to rely on any of his companions, even though teamwork is required. Silka believes that this is not a cause for major concern, because it is natural for people to start adapting to their companions after some time. When the group was formed, for example, Yui and Silka barely talked to each other, but over time they became best friends. Lloyd's case is different. He seems to believe for some reason that he is weak, so he desperately strives to prove his worth, even without realizing it. There is certainly a reason for him to act this way, and Silka believes that in time Lloyd will end up opening up to the group. Meanwhile, outside, Lloyd remains alert during the night watch. When Dagas approaches asking for a favor, he asks Lloyd to take care of something, and Lloyd readily offers to help. but says that he does not feel comfortable abandoning his guard post. At that moment, Cross appears and says that he will take over the watch while Lloyd is away. Faced with this, Lloyd agrees and accompanies Dagast. They move a little deeper into the forest, where Dagast begins setting up a complex system of bells attached to the trees. Lloyd asks what those bells are for, and Dagast explains that they will alert the group if any monster approaches, which means that Lloyd will no longer need to stay awake all night keeping watch. Lloyd begins to protest, saying that he will not be able to use his detection magic while sleeping, but Dagast asks whether he really trusts him so little. Lloyd immediately denies it, but by the way he has been acting lately, it really seems that he does not fully trust the group. He always insists on doing reconnaissance alone and refuses to let anyone else in the group take over the night watch or help him. Lloyd assures Dagast that he does trust the group, but explains that for many years his master always told him that he needed to learn to do everything on his own. In addition, the first group he joined after arriving in the capital called him useless, so he came to believe that he needed to push himself to the limit to be useful. Dagast tells him that he does not see Lloyd as a burden in any way, and that even if he were slowing the group down a little, that would not be a problem. After all, the reason the group was formed was precisely so that everyone could rely on one another. Lloyd had never even considered the idea of depending on other people, so hearing this was a fantastic revelation for him. Dagast asks what kind of torture Lloyd must have endured to end up like that, but for now it is best to sleep, so they return to the camp. Croix takes over the watch, and Lloyd and Dagast manage to rest a bit in the tent. Lloyd is still not used to the idea, but the possibility of having true companions is pleasant, so he decides to try. The next morning, Lloyd looks for Yui and asks if she can help him fetch water. Yui freezes for a moment, incredulous, since this is the first time Lloyd has asked her for help. Even so, she is happy that he is finally trusting her and agrees to help with a smile on her face. Meanwhile, in a nearby castle, an evil count receives a report, informing him that all the magic stones have been positioned exactly as he ordered. Michaels is satisfied to hear this, since everything is proceeding as he planned. Thanks to the monster attacks he orchestrated, almost all the adventurers of the capital have been sent away. Now, only low-level adventurers and the hero's party remain. Honestly, Michaels would also have preferred the hero's party to be gone, but he is quite confident that he will be able to crush them easily with his forces, so that will not be a problem. And honestly, having a Lloyd there in the hero's party will be easy as well. Back in the forest, Lloyd and the others continue advancing, but Yui begins to feel a very bad premonition. The area is very quiet, and everyone finds it strange that they have not encountered a single monster since entering that part of the forest. Yui asks Lloyd if he has anything to do with this strange disappearance, but Lloyd replies that the only spell he is using is detection magic, and it does not drive monsters away. This means that there is something very different frightening the creatures, so Lloyd increases the range of his detection magic to try to find out what it is. After a few seconds analyzing the area, he finally notices something and warns the group that there is a horde of monsters 2.5 kilometers ahead. According to the map, that is exactly the direction of the farm they were heading toward. Even before they can comment on it, Yui asks incredulously whether Lloyd really just scanned everything within a 2-kilometer radius. Lloyd confirms that he did, still not thinking it was anything special, but the others explain that this is more than 10 times the range that even the most talented mages are capable of reaching. Lloyd had no idea that 2 kilometers were that impressive, but instinctively he tries to downplay the feat, saying that this is practically his maximum limit, and that it consumes a lot of mana, so he cannot use it frequently. Even so, it does not diminish how absurd it was. Yui starts to get genuinely irritated by Lloyd's inability to recognize his own power, but they have a mission to accomplish now, so they decide to leave, giving him a scolding for later. When they finally arrive at the farm, even having been warned about the number of monsters ahead, seeing everything with their own eyes is terrifying. In addition to the enormous number of high-level wolves, Lloyd remembers that the report mentioned several different species of monsters in the horde, so he begins to wonder where the others are. The others agree, since they know there should be stronger creatures in that forest. It makes little sense for the wolves to have come out on top if there had been a direct confrontation. Lloyd asks whether Yui knows where the owner of the farm is, but she says she is not sure, only that the request mentioned that the owner had been injured and was in the city with his son. At that moment, Cross notices something very strange in the middle of the forest and asks the others to take a look. They cannot see anything, since their vision is not as sharp as Cross's. At first, Lloyd also sees nothing, so he casts an enhancement spell on his eyes. With that, he finally manages to see a sinister stone positioned right at the center of the farm. Lloyd applies the enhancement to the others as well, and everyone agrees that that stone is definitely bad news. From what Lloyd can tell, he believes that it is orc magic. Merlin had already told him that orc magic is capable of controlling monsters, so someone must be using that magic stone to lure them there. To be sure, Lloyd casts his detection magic once again, and exactly as he imagined, he discovers another gigantic horde of monsters advancing directly toward them. He wonders why someone would go to so much trouble to attract monsters in that way, since if the goal were to eliminate the group, there are far simpler ways to do it. Lloyd is still immersed in these thoughts when Cross reminds him that the second horde is coming, so they should probably retreat as soon as possible. Yui says that they cannot retreat, because if they do, the farm will be destroyed. Cross argues that there is no way they can handle a horde of more than 1,000 monsters by themselves. Daggers, however, believes that retreating is not even an option at this point, since even if they manage to escape, they could end up leading the monsters straight to the village. None of them knows for sure what to do, until Lloyd says that they should stay and fight, because he has a plan. First, he states that they need to get rid of that magic stone, and asks Cross whether he thinks he can hit it from there. Cross is an exceptional archer, so he believes he can hit the target, but the distance is too great, and he is not sure he would have enough power to destroy it with a single shot. Lloyd says that this is not a problem, since if the only issue is strength, he can compensate with enhancement magic. Then Cross takes his position, aims carefully, and just before firing, Lloyd casts 3 layers of enhancement magic simultaneously on him. The arrow then crosses the entire field and hits the stone dead center, shattering it with a single strike. Cross is impressed that he managed to hit it and asks Lloyd what he did. Lloyd explains that he cast enhancement magic on him, on the bow, and on the arrow at the same time, to concentrate as much force as possible into the shot. This is obviously not something normal people can do, but Lloyd, as always, thinks it is nothing special. With the destruction of the magic stone, the monsters begin to attack one another, since they are no longer under mental control. Even if they do not completely eliminate each other, Lloyd believes that this will greatly reduce their numbers. When the other horde arrives, Lloyd even expects it to stop advancing after the stone is destroyed, but that does not happen, and the group takes their positions while waiting for the monsters to approach. Upon seeing the absurd number of enemies coming toward them, some begin to lose their nerve, but Lloyd asks them to wait until the monsters get closer before attacking. The moment the monsters approach Silka, Lloyd gives the signal, and she then casts her spell, Firestorm. It proves to be far more powerful than she ever imagined, vaporizing the monsters before her eyes. The others know that this spell should never have such an effect, so they ask what Lloyd did. He once again replies calmly that he merely cast mana enhancement and mana consumption reduction on Silka, making her spells far more efficient. With the first stage complete, Lloyd runs over to Cross to prepare the next phase of the plan. He establishes a mental link with him, something Lloyd apparently can do. Using his spatial magic, he transmits the locations of all flying monsters, allowing Cross to strike them even through the dense smoke. Little by little, every creature is eliminated, and it is time for the final phase of the plan. Lloyd runs back to Silka and asks if she has finished dealing with the ground monsters. She answers that she has, but that she is almost out of mana and cannot do much more. Lloyd tells her not to worry and asks her to hold his hand. Silka has no idea what he intends to do, but she obeys. The moment their hands touch, Lloyd begins transferring mana directly to her. With that mana, Silka casts a spell that creates storm clouds over the forest, extinguishing the fires caused by the battle. Soon after, Silka collapses, completely exhausted, having used all of her mana. Lloyd is also exhausted, but while Yui and the others praise him for essentially carrying the group on his back during the operation, all that goes through his mind is how inadequate he feels for getting tired after subduing more than 1,000 monsters. Despite feeling relieved that they completed the mission, something does not feel right. If his intuition is correct, then all of them have fallen into a trap. The more Lloyd thinks about it, the more this mission seems like a carefully engineered ambush. And if it truly is a trap, then the goal must be to lure high-level adventurers away from the capital. Lloyd believes this means someone planned to weaken the city's defenses in order to attack it with little resistance. However, the others point out that the heroes group and the knights are still in Istar, so it is not as if the city is completely undefended. That said, since the warning comes from Lloyd, no one there is foolish enough to ignore it. Just to be safe, Yui suggests that everyone return to the city to make sure everything is fine. Lloyd agrees, and without saying a single word, he casts acceleration magic on everyone and starts running back toward the city. The others see Lloyd sprinting ahead and do not understand how he is moving so fast. However, they soon realize that they are also running at the same speed, and conclude that he must have done something. When they ask for an explanation, Lloyd says that he simply increased everyone's speed so they could return to the city as quickly as possible. Everyone thanks him, although Lloyd could have warned them when casting his spells so that his contributions would not go unnoticed. While Lloyd and the group race back to the city, the Count sits at his desk. He is holding a small glass of wine when General Christie enters the room. Christie asks how the plan is going, and the Count replies that the attack is almost ready. And all of this is thanks to the girl Christie kidnapped, since she has been extremely useful. In fact, the Count has many experiments he wishes to conduct on her, and now he will have all the time in the world to do so once the city of Istar falls. Christie senses that the Count is plotting something deeply disturbing, but decides not to question it. After all, the Count was once the right hand of the Demon King, so his competence is not something to doubt. Meanwhile, the girl is locked away in the depths of the castle. From time to time, the Count brings her some magical potions and then extracts her mana to create the magic crystals that attract beasts, the same ones they have been using. This has happened so many times that the girl has completely lost the will to resist. Back with Lloyd's group, they cross the vast grassy plains and head toward the city in record time. However, Silka begins to worry about Lloyd's condition, since maintaining this acceleration magic for so long must be extremely taxing. Lloyd does not understand what she is talking about, since once you get the hang of it, it is possible to greatly reduce mana consumption, making the effort almost negligible. The others ask what he means by getting the hang of it. Then Lloyd explains that when he was a child, Merlin left him alone in the middle of the forest. He only returned once he managed to find his way home by himself. Naturally, as a white mage, Lloyd could not defeat the monsters. So all he could do was cast acceleration magic on himself and run to survive. As a result, he tested every kind of magic repeatedly at times, until he finally managed to return home. The others are quite shocked by what they have just heard, but he says that he is sure it was just a common training method, nothing special. Then Yui and Silka pause, surprised that they even need to say this out loud. They explain that legal guardians normally do not leave children alone in the forest to fend for themselves. They try to make this as clear as possible, but Lloyd interprets it as meaning that normal children go through even harsher training. To him, this only proves that his abilities must be inadequate. Is this Lloyd joking? Possibly. Well, after all that, they rest just a little, and Lloyd casts the magic once again as they resume running toward the city. However, midway through the journey, Lloyd suddenly stops, causing everyone to crash into one another. They ask why he stopped so abruptly, and Lloyd explains that he just felt something very strange ahead, but he is not sure what it is. Silka asks if it is a monster, but Lloyd believes it is not. If he had to define it, it feels more like a predator stalking its prey. Even so, he says he will only be sure once he gets closer, so he asks the others to move ahead while he investigates. Yui immediately objects, saying that Lloyd has no idea what he might encounter, and that if he has to face a dangerous enemy, he will not be able to handle it alone. Lloyd admits that she is right, and the others agree, saying that they are a group, and that investigating together is the natural choice. Lloyd deeply appreciates the fact that everyone cares about his safety. He then leads the group toward the source of the disturbance, and now, from closer range, he can state with certainty that there are demons inside that house. Hearing this, Yui asks if he is sure, since demons are normally only found in the Magocracy. For centuries, they have tried to dominate the continent, but currently they are forbidden from entering the three great nations. The others look at Lloyd in confusion, since all of this is basic knowledge, yet he reacts as if he is hearing it for the first time. A little embarrassed, Lloyd admits that he has no memories of his childhood. In fact, his earliest memory is the day Merlin picked him up. At that time, the war had already ended, and regardless, if there really are demons there, Dagaz believes they should warn the city's knights as soon as possible, and Lloyd agrees. However, before doing that, he would like to gather a bit more information. The others say that getting any closer now would be dangerous. Lloyd understands the risks, but even so, the mana he senses coming from that house is similar to the magic crystals that attract all those creatures. This means that the demons inside are likely connected to the mind behind the plan to attack the city. And if that is the case, Lloyd believes that gathering information is worth the risk. Yui agrees with him, and then convinces the others that, as adventurers, it is their duty to protect people, and that demons unquestionably represent a real threat. Furthermore, if they are lucky, they might be able to completely prevent the attack on Esquita, and if they can deal with the demons right there, it is worth trying. However, when they approach the window and peek inside, they are shocked to realize that the place is completely empty. Lloyd performs a full scan once again and discovers that the demons are underground. Judging by the flow of mana, they are clearly not planning anything good. He then asks Silka if she can use earth magic, since that is the only way for them to reach the underground area. Silka confirms that she can use earth magic, and Lloyd casts a magic enhancement on everyone. She conjures her sand pit spell, opening a hole in the ground. The group drops directly on top of the demon's ritual. They are confused and demand to know who the intruders are. Yui immediately presses her sword against one of their faces and threatens him with death if he does not immediately explain what they are doing there. However, before he can answer, another demon intervenes and uses earth magic to hurl several rocks at Yui, forcing her to divert her attention for a moment, and that is enough time for the demon to escape. He runs past one of the demons who saved him, and immediately afterward, Croix fires an arrow at the demon. The first one then runs straight for the door, completely abandoning his companions. He rushes down the corridor and locks the door behind him to prevent Yui from following. The demons left behind try to attack Yui from behind while she deals with the door, but Croix intervenes, shooting both of them in the thigh, allowing Yui to finish them off with ease. With the demons of that place defeated, the group gathers again and prepares to go after the last enemy. On the other side of the door, the demon is using magic to envelop the girl in a cocoon, planning to take her away from there. However, Yu and the others break down the door moments before, and the demon turns around and tries to flee. Everyone gives chase to the creature, climbing the stairs until they reach the outside. The way things were going, it seemed that the demon might actually escape, but Lloyd asks Yu to run ahead to cut off his escape route, while Silka and Dagaz attack from the side. Soon, the demon is left with nowhere to go, and Lloyd orders him to surrender, since he has many questions to ask. The demon refuses, and in a final act of desperation, he conjures a lightning spell in an attempt to annihilate the group. Lloyd notices the attack in time and raises magical barriers around everyone, deflecting the strike. The final attack ends up piercing the demon's chest, bringing his life to an end. With the demon defeated, Lloyd takes control of the magical cocoon and dispels it. To his surprise, inside it there is a beast girl. For now, they take her back to the cabin and place her on the bed to rest. However, with all the demons dead, there is no one left to interrogate. So the only person who might know something is this girl. She does not seem like she will wake up anytime soon. So Dagaz asks Lloyd if he can heal her. Lloyd replies that he will try, then raises the staff over her body and begins the healing process. Silka is impressed by the effectiveness of Lloyd's healing magic. He casually comments that he made some improvements to it during his free time. Yui makes a point of being very clear about this, and tells Lloyd that most adventurers are not even capable of enhancing spells. In fact, it is extremely rare for someone to even adjust an existing spell. So what Lloyd is doing is something truly absurd. Lloyd had no idea that tinkering with spells was something so out of the ordinary, since Merlin frequently forced him to help her refine her own magic. Even so, this time he understands what Yui means, and for the first time does not try to downplay his own talent. The boy is finally improving. A short while later, the girl begins to move on the bed, and as soon as she opens her eyes, Yui starts bombarding her with questions. Since there are many things she wants to know, the girl can barely keep up, but manages to say that her name is Claire, which is already progressed. Lloyd decides to take over the interrogation from there. He asks Claire if she knows why she was imprisoned by the demon. Claire remains silent, so Lloyd changes the subject and explains that they are adventurers who came to save a farm that was being attacked by monsters. The monsters were being drawn in by a magical crystal in the middle of the farm, and Lloyd could feel beast magic coming from it. He remembers having learned that some beast races possess magic capable of controlling beasts, so he asks if the magic that controlled the monsters was coming from Claire. She hesitates for a moment, but ends up admitting that the magic is indeed hers. Meanwhile, back in the city, some guards end up finding one of the magical crystals that the demons had installed in the surrounding areas. However, now it is already too late. The monsters have already begun to appear, and it will not take long before the entire city is overrun. Still in the city, Alan is growing increasingly frustrated, as he has been trying to find a replacement for Lloyd. All the white mages who applied can barely cast 2 spells at the same time, while Lloyd used 5 with ease. Rihanna tries to say that perhaps Lloyd was a special case, but Alan's pride does not allow him to accept that. Instead, he concludes that all the white mages in the city must be even more useless than Lloyd ever was, so he decides to continue recruiting until someone worthwhile appears. At that moment, a member of the Imperial Guard enters the room. Bringing more news, he reports that monsters have been sighted outside the city, and that there are more than 10,000 of them. The king immediately requested help from the heroes' party to defend the city. Alan still has the power to defend the city, or at least that is what he believes. And convinced that he and his group are the strongest that exist, he accepts the mission without a second thought. Seeing how unconcerned Alan appears in the face of the situation, the guard lets out a sigh of relief, believing that he truly knows what he is doing. Poor guard, he will soon find out. As soon as the guard leaves, Sheena asks Alan if he is really sure about this. After all, dealing with 10,000 monsters is far too much for a single group. Alan, however, shows no concern at all. What truly occupies his mind is the glory he will achieve by fulfilling a royal request, consolidating his name as the strongest individual in the entire kingdom. Just by the way he speaks, the other members of the group can already tell that this will not end well. Meanwhile, in the forest, Lloyd and Claire have just located the second wave of monsters. If this group joins the horde, which is already converging on Esquita, there is absolutely nothing they can do, and the city's chance of survival is almost non-existent. Lloyd tells Claire that they need to do something to eliminate the monsters, but she seems very hesitant, and asks if there is not a way to stop the horde without killing them. Even though it was controlled by the demons, it was her power that ended up being used to attract all those creatures, so she feels partially responsible for them. Lloyd realizes that Claire cares about the monsters, and promises to come up with a plan to save the city, while keeping the number of casualties among the creatures as low as possible. For that, he will need her help. Lloyd asks Claire if she can use magic to return the monsters to their natural habitats. She replies that this is possible, but she does not know if she could do something like that with so many monsters gathered in one place. Lloyd asks if the situation would change if he used support magic to strengthen her abilities. Claire is not sure if that would work, but she is willing to try, and given how strong the man's magic is, it will surely work. She then begins to conjure her magic to communicate with the monsters, but before she can activate the spell, something in the forest interferes with the process, preventing her from continuing. Whatever it is, they will not be able to do anything until they discover the source of that interference. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Alan calls a meeting with all the adventurers who still remain in the city, but he is disappointed by how weak they seem to be. Shenna explains that all A rank or higher groups were sent on external missions, so what remains is the cream of the B rank. It is not ideal, but she emphasizes that Alan should not insult them like that. Alan, however, has been treating B-rank adventurers as mere disposable pawns, and they begin to get genuinely irritated by this. And kid, here is a very good piece of advice. Never provoke someone who will be at your side on the battlefield. Something very bad can happen. Well, continuing on, they are there to face monsters, not to fight among themselves, so there is no time for arguments. And after the guild lord says this to everyone, Alan agrees to stop the insults. And since they need a plan, he stands up and announces his strategy. He wants all the mages to cast their most powerful offensive spells right at the start of the battle, eliminating 10 monsters each. While the mages recover their mana, Alan and the close combat fighters would advance to buy time. In theory, this plan is surprisingly good. The problem is that the adventurers explain that they simply do not have enough firepower for that. At most, their strongest spells would be capable of defeating a single monster, so eliminating 10 at once is completely impossible. Alan starts calling everyone incompetent, then Mia speaks up and says that she herself cannot do that. Alan asks what she is talking about, and Mia explains that some time ago, the power of her spells dropped drastically, and she could no longer use magic with the same effectiveness. And not only her, everyone in the group noticed a significant drop in their power, and all of this started the day after Lloyd left the group. Alan accuses all of them of having lied about their abilities, but Hina fires back, saying that no one ever lied to him. In fact, the same thing must be happening to Alan as well, and if he had devoted even a little time to training, he would have already noticed that he also became weaker. But no, he was too busy boasting there, being called a hero. Hina says bluntly that he does not deserve that title. And all of this is said in front of several low-rank adventurers. Ashamed, Alan tries to prove his strength, throwing a full-force punch at Hina. She stops the blow with the palm of her hand, without the slightest effort. And honestly, if that happened to me, I would drop the sword and move to the countryside and live as a farmer. That is better than this here. The entire guild saw that happen, so there is not the slightest chance of Alan's reputation recovering, especially after he spent the last half hour calling everyone useless. Ashamed, Alan runs out of the guild, leaving the adventurers wondering how someone like him managed to become a hero in the first place. It becomes clear to everyone that they cannot rely on Alan to save them. The group begins to panic, trying to decide what to do, since it will not take long for the monsters to begin the attack. Some even start to consider abandoning the city. But Hina asks everyone to calm down, stating that she is still willing to stay and fight. The adventurers feel reassured knowing that someone as competent as Hina is still on their side. Even so, she cannot deny that the situation is extremely serious, so as a first measure, she asks if anyone has seen a man named Lloyd recently. While Hina searches for him, Lloyd is still in the forest with Claire. The two end up locating another magical crystal hidden among the trees. The dark energy emanating from it is probably the cause of the interference in Claire's spell. As long as this crystal exists, she will not be able to regain control of the monster. The problem is that this is much easier said than done, since there must be at least half a dozen of these crystals scattered throughout the forest. Finding them manually would take an eternity, so Lloyd agrees that combing the entire forest would be unfeasible. He asks Claire if she can sense the location of the crystals, since they are being fueled by her power. Claire replies that she can sense the energy of the crystals when she is relatively close, but the forest is far too large for this to be truly effective. Lloyd says that this is not a problem, because he already has a perfect plan in mind. Before Claire can even ask what he intends to do, Lloyd casts sensory sharing and enhancement magic on her. Now Claire can sense all the magical crystals in the forest, and their exact locations are transmitted directly to Lloyd's mind. Next, he casts invisibility magic on himself and Claire, allowing them to move through the forest without being detected by the monsters. Claire is left completely speechless, since he did all of this without showing the slightest sign of fatigue. Thus, the two manage to infiltrate the forest without being noticed, while Claire begins to dissipate the dark energy and destroy the crystals. Meanwhile, in the city, all the adventurers gather outside the walls and prepare for battle, although they are visibly apprehensive. Earlier, Hina explained to everyone that the true reason for the hero group's success was always Lloyd. He was the key piece behind all those victories. Upon hearing this, some adventurers ask why Lloyd was expelled from the group if he was so important. Hina admits that this happened due to pure negligence on the part of the group. The hero title went to their heads, and whenever they performed well in combat, they attributed the credit solely to their own strength, completely ignoring the support that Lloyd provided. She says that their only hope now is to ask for his help. And yet, the guild manager informs them that Lloyd is not in the city. Shortly after being expelled from the hero group, he joined an S-rank group and left on a monster hunting mission. For an ordinary person, that journey would take days. Hina, however, correctly deduces that Lloyd would be able to drastically reduce the travel time using his magic. So, if they are lucky, he should already be on his way. With no other options, Hina tells everyone that they are betting everything on the hope of Lloyd returning in time to save them. Everyone trusts Hina's judgment, but that does not stop them from feeling despair as they look at what they are about to face. Hina's plan is to have the archers fire the first volley of arrows to reduce the number of monsters. As soon as they enter the trenches dug around the city, the shield bearers will form the line to hold them back. Meanwhile, the mage squad will pour all available magic onto them. Maintaining this will not be easy, but with this strategy, they might be able to hold out until Lloyd's group arrives. Later that night, Yu and the others are already approaching Ishtar, and fortunately, the effect of Lloyd's acceleration magic is still active, so they will be able to keep running after a brief rest. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Claire find the last magical crystal hidden in the forest. As soon as they deactivate it, all the monsters finally return to normal. Unfortunately, the monsters in that area are high-level wolves, and there are also blood panthers. These are two species that have evolutionary rivalry, so the moment they return to normal, they begin to fight. In the middle of this chaos, one of the monsters bumps into Claire, and the impact dispels Lloyd's invisibility magic. Immediately, all the monsters turn their attention to her. Paralyzed by fear, Claire completely forgets that her power allows her to control monsters. She is about to be devoured, but fortunately Lloyd acts at the last instant, drawing the creatures to himself and saving her. The situation in the city is not looking good at all. Although they have managed to hold back the monsters so far, the battle has already lasted 2 hours. People are beginning to grow exhausted, and little by little the monsters start breaking through the defensive formation. At this pace it will not last much longer. But just when everything seemed lost, a massive fireball crosses the battlefield, and it is Yui and her group who have finally arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, at Lloyd's side, he has been doing his best to simply evade the monster's attacks, since under the circumstances that was practically all he could do. Claire is amazed by Lloyd's absurd speed, but she does not understand why he is not attacking. To her, someone as powerful as him should be able to defeat those creatures easily. Then, she remembers the promise Lloyd made to keep the number of monsters killed to a minimum, out of consideration for her. That is probably why he refuses to attack them directly. Claire does not want Lloyd to keep suffering because of her, so she decides to act. She uses her powers and begins to sing a song, causing all the monsters to calm down and slowly return to the forest. Lloyd even wishes she had done that earlier, but he is still impressed and asks what exactly she did. Claire explains that she simply used her powers to politely ask the monsters to return to the forest, and they obeyed. Now that the monsters in the area have been freed from mental control, Lloyd tells Claire that they need to run back to Ishtar. Meanwhile, in Ishtar, the battle against the monsters continues intensely. Even with the help of Yui's group, they have barely managed to reduce the size of the horde, and weapons are breaking. Mana is running out, and everything suggests that this may truly be the end. Rina begs everyone not to give up, stating that they will still find a way to win. However, the front lines have already been breached, and people are being injured constantly. They manage to hold out until dawn, but by that point, all of the city's defenses have already been destroyed. The guild manager begins to fear that this is the end of the city of Ishtar. But before it is completely overrun, everyone hears a voice singing. It comes from the cliff near the forest. It is Claire, and her song is being amplified by Lloyd's magic. Thanks to this, all the monsters in the city cease their attack and begin to return to the forest. And the city finally stops being invaded. When the monsters leave, Claire stops singing and almost collapses from exhaustion. But Lloyd catches her before she falls, and both of them feel relieved for having managed to save the city. But the crisis is not over yet. All of this was orchestrated by the demons, and they had more than one attack planned. Now, a horde of golems is marching toward the city. Meanwhile, Count Michael relaxes calmly in his castle, confident that Ishtar must have already been completely crushed by the monsters. However, suddenly, a messenger enters his office with an urgent report. Michael initially thinks it is confirmation of Ishtar's fall, but to his surprise, the messenger reports that the monsters suddenly ceased their attack and dispersed into the forest, all except the golems, which for some reason were unable to hear Claire's song. Lloyd assumes that the demons are interfering in some way, but at this rate, the golems will still cause enormous damage, so he casts his acceleration magic on Claire and says that they need to run to the city immediately. As they pass by the golems, they end up being spotted, and Lloyd tells Claire to retreat to avoid the strike of one of them. After a quick analysis, it becomes clear that those golems were artificially enhanced, which means defeating them will not be easy at all. When they reach the trenches around the city, Lloyd grabs Claire by the waist and leaps over them in a single jump. All the soldiers are left speechless, because jumping that distance while carrying another person is not normal at all. But considering that Lloyd possesses absurd enhancement magic, it almost makes sense. On the other side, Lloyd reunites with his companions, who thank him for everything he did to save the city. Lloyd replies that they should thank Claire, since it was her magic that made most of the monsters retreat. However, the golems are on the way, so everyone needs to prepare. At that moment, Lloyd's knees give out, and he falls to the ground. He has been using magic almost non-stop for days, and that is too much even for him. The others say that he needs to rest, since he is pushing himself beyond his limits. But Lloyd insists that he cannot rest while the city is still in danger. Shortly afterward, the guild manager appears, and Lloyd then asks him to take care of Claire for now, since her safety is extremely important to him. The guild manager understands and assigns several knights to protect her, promising that she will be safe. Even so, he does not hide his relief that Lloyd arrived in time, since he is the only person who can save the city now. Lloyd is confused upon hearing this, as he believed that the hero's party was still in Ishtar. At that moment, Riina appears and says that Alan refused to fight. Lloyd cannot believe this, since what kind of hero would abandon his duties when lives are at stake? But Riina says that someone like Alan does not deserve the title of hero. At that moment, Lloyd notices the wound on Riina's arm, which is quite severe. He does not hesitate for a second before using his magic to heal her. The guild master is impressed by how easily Lloyd heals Riina. However, Lloyd nearly faints right afterward, as his mana is dangerously low. Riina says that he did not need to push himself so hard just to heal her, but Lloyd replies that he could not leave her injured like that. Riina takes the opportunity to apologize. She says that she never properly valued everything Lloyd did for her and for the group. Even though he was the main reason the heroes' party became so strong, Lloyd still denies it, saying that he is not that powerful. But Riina insists his support was essential, and no one ever gave him proper credit. She admits that she was also wrong, since she did not stop Alan from expelling him from the group, so she formally apologizes to him. At that moment, the guards sound the alarms. The golems have arrived. Although some fall into the trenches, many remain standing, and the soldiers rush forward to attack them as quickly as possible. Lloyd tries to warn them to wait, since those golems are not normal at all, but it is already too late. A guard's sword shatters the instant it strikes a golem, and while he is still in shock, he is hit by a devastating punch. The situation begins to turn critical, and Sheena raises her shield and orders everyone to attack with full force. However, magic and long-range weapons practically ricochet off the golem's armor, forcing everyone to retreat. Panic begins to spread, and if nothing is done soon, the city could still be destroyed. That is when Lloyd tells Yui that he is going to cast an enhancement spell on everyone. Yui asks if he is sure, since casting a spell on more than 100 people sounds absurd, and the boy is almost out of mana. Lloyd says he can handle it, but that he will only be able to apply the effects in separate groups, not all at once. Lloyd then begins to cast the spells, and when he finishes, his legs give out. His mana is exhausted, and he warns that he has just cast strength enhancement on the front line and mana enhancement on the mages. He also reinforced his companions, but they need to act quickly, since he does not know how long the effects will last. Yui understands and climbs one of the towers, shouting to everyone on the battlefield that Lloyd has just cast magic on them. So now it is possible to face the golems. The soldiers hesitate, finding it hard to believe that someone strengthened them so quickly. But when one of them is about to be crushed by a golem, Hina runs in and blocks the attack. Then, Yui leaps from the tower and cuts the golem in half. With the first golem cut down, Hina raises her shield and says that this is proof that Lloyd's magic works. Now, everyone realizes that they truly feel much stronger than before. With Lloyd's support, it might be possible to win. And then Lloyd orders Croix to go help the magic unit in the rear, while Dagaz and Asilka must advance to the front line immediately. When he is on the verge of collapsing, a guard helps him stand and takes him to the fortifications so he can rest. Thanks to Lloyd's magical effort, the adventurers begin destroying the golems one by one. Lloyd watches them and cheers for them from atop a tower. However, when they are about to defeat the last golem, the effects of the magic fade. The adventurers become unable to harm it again, and it is only one golem. But if no one can stop it, it will enter the city and cause enormous destruction. Yui runs forward to try to block its path, and when the golem is about to attack, Hina pushes Yui aside and Dagaz blocks the blow with his shield. Even so, they will not be able to hold it back for long, and Lloyd knows that he has to do something, and his mana is practically depleted. But he manages to gather his last strength to cast a spell directly onto Yui's sword. Yui realizes what he did and asks Dagaz and Hina to cover her for a moment. The two raise their shields, and when they block the golem's punch, Yui takes advantage of the opening. Running along the creature's arm, she severs its head with a single strike, and with that, the city of Ishtida is finally saved. Lloyd lets out a sigh of relief, as now he can finally rest properly. And in Michael's castle, the general storms into the room in a fury, having just discovered that the captured beast girl managed to escape, and he demands explanations. But Michael had already realized that the attack had failed, so he packed his bags and fled. Where is Malandro? The general flies into a rage. After destroying Michael's office, he decides that he will kill the person who interfered with his plans. Meanwhile, back in the city, Lloyd wakes up at an inn. Shortly after, Yui appears to check on how he is doing. She feels very relieved to see him awake, since he slept for an entire day due to how exhausted he was. The first thing Lloyd does is apologize, saying that it was his fault for not being strong enough. Yui, already tired of seeing Lloyd belittle himself, just as everyone else is tired of it, asks him to go with her to see something. She leads him to the front door. When he opens it, Lloyd sees a huge crowd gathered outside. Everyone is waiting for him. He panics and immediately closes the door. Never before had so many people shouted his name. Yui says that they just want to thank the savior of the city, and that it is rude to shut the door in their faces, so he should go out and greet them. However, when she opens the door again, Lloyd has already jumped out the window and is running around the block to escape the crowd. Meanwhile, at Merlin's house, Yui goes to pay a little visit. But just as he is about to open the door, a huge explosion occurs. Merlin appears shortly after and says that an explosion is not exactly the best way to welcome a guest. In her defense, she says that she thought he was an intruder, but Yui does not mind, since he was not hit. Merlin remains impressed by the fact that Yui always manages to come out unharmed from her spells. Upon entering, Yui finds Thor and Lily, two of his former teammates, along with Merlin, from the time when they were heroes. It has been a long time since they were all gathered together like this. Merlin asks Yui if he has any news about how Lloyd is doing. Yui then tells her that Lloyd was expelled from the hero group some time ago, and Merlin becomes very sad upon hearing this and cannot understand how the group could have rejected someone like Lloyd. However, Yui says that there is no reason to worry, since Lloyd is now part of an S-rank group and is doing very well. Merlin is happy to hear this, but Yui still has one more thing to say. Even without ever having spoken directly with Lloyd, he observed him long enough to conclude that Merlin probably had quite problematic methods of upbringing. Back in the city, Lloyd watches from the top of a building as a crowd of people fills the streets searching for him. He still does not fully understand what is going on, and shortly after his friends find him there, and he asks why so many people are after him, they explain that the people only wanted to show gratitude for what Lloyd did in saving the city. Lloyd, however, still thinks that he does not deserve any thanks, because to him, that was merely the minimum he should do to help. Yui then tells him that he is belittling himself again. She points out that Lloyd constantly sets unrealistic expectations for himself and punishes himself unnecessarily. Everyone agrees that he should have a bit more confidence in himself, and for the first time, Lloyd seems to truly understand what they mean at last. At Merlin's house, Will comments that Lloyd is far too humble for his own good, and has no idea how strong he truly is. To him, it is almost a miracle that Lloyd found a group that does not try to take advantage of that. Merlin realizes that she may have been mistaken in the way she trained Lloyd, but all she wanted was to prevent him from making the same mistakes she made in the past. Meanwhile, in the city, Lloyd finally accepts to meet the crowd. People begin to thank him for strengthening them during the battle, and to everyone there, Lloyd is now the new hero of Ishtita. As for Alan and his group, they are in serious trouble. Refusing to help without justification during a crisis automatically results in the loss of the Royal Hero title. With that, their elevated status disappears, and his ego does not allow him to remain in a city where Lloyd is celebrated as a hero. Thus, he orders everyone to pack their bags to leave as soon as possible, and the girls follow him, even reluctantly. The next day, Lloyd and his group are summoned to the Lord's castle. Upon arriving, they are surprised to find Claire waiting for them there. Yu asks if she was also summoned, but shortly after, the Lord appears and explains that Claire is actually an honored guest. After everyone takes their seats, Lord Abel reveals that Claire is the third princess of the Empire of the Four, which makes her an extremely important figure. Lloyd and the others are quite surprised to discover that Claire is actually of royal blood. Even so, Abel asks what they thought of Claire's power. After witnessing everything up close, Lloyd replies that her power is very impressive, but also frightening, since in the wrong hands it could cause immense chaos. Precisely because of that, Abel states that he cannot allow her to fall into the hands of the demons again. The Empire will soon attempt to recover its princess, so Abel has a special mission for Yu's group. This mission is to escort Claire to the royal capital, called Sylphide. Normally, this task would be entrusted to the royal knights, but that would draw far too much attention. Abel is not very keen on alerting the demons to Claire's location, since it is clear that the demons desire her power. Lloyd believes they will not give up on her so easily. The group ends up accepting the mission, and the following morning, they all depart and travel. After 10 days pass, the group is still on their way to the capital. Yu begins to wonder how much longer it will take for them to arrive. Daggers says that they will soon reach a city where they can rest, and comments that the place is quite famous for its hot springs. Yu asks Claire if she would like to visit a hot spring when they arrive. Claire replies that she has never had the opportunity to experience one, which makes Yu shout in shock, saying that she missed out on something incredible. Meanwhile, the others rest beneath a tree, commenting on how Yu has been especially friendly with Claire since the start of the journey. Part of it is simply Yu's personality, but it also helps ease the tension, since it is quite stressful to remember that technically they are fleeing from demons. When they finally arrive in the city, the first thing they do is follow Yu's suggestion and head straight to the hot springs. Yu and Silka enter the water without wasting any time, barely noticing how strange it is that there is no one else around. Claire, on the other hand, is far too nervous to remove her towel. She is not very accustomed to bathing with other people and feels quite embarrassed. Yu and Silka understand how she feels, but they tell her that there is nothing to be ashamed of, since there are only girls there. After some time, Claire finally gives in and enters the water with them, but only on the condition that they do not stare too much. A few minutes later, Yu is fixated on Claire's body. When Claire starts to find this strange, Yu praises her slender silhouette, saying that it suits a princess very well. Even so, Claire remains insecure, since she does not have as much volume as Silka. Claire also admires Yu, since she has a very large airbag, but Silka says that is because Yu has gained weight over the past few weeks. Yu stands up to argue, but then she remembers all the desserts and meats she has been eating lately, and realizing that Silka is probably right. Even though she does not like it, she admits it. While the two of them are arguing, Dagaz, Croix, and Lloyd are on the other side of the wall, washing each other's backs and hearing absolutely everything. Dagaz and Croix do their best to ignore improper thoughts, but at that moment Lloyd has something entirely different occupying his mind. Since the demons want to recapture Claire, it is certain that they will try to act to reach her. It is unlikely that they will be able to launch a large-scale attack within the kingdom, but a smaller elite unit is far more plausible. Because of that, Lloyd needs to develop some countermeasures. The original plan was for the group to spend only one night in the city and continue their journey the next morning. But Lloyd calls a meeting and says that he would like to remain there for a few days so he can make the preparations he needs to carry out. Dagaz says that he also wants to stay, since he is thinking about improving his equipment. Silka comments that she could use the time to experiment a bit more with her magic. As for Cross, he does not care much about the decision, and Yui is fine either way. With most of the group wanting to stay, Yui agrees to postpone their departure for a few days so that everyone can prepare for the journey. The following morning, Dagaz goes out to take a look at the weapon shops in the area. However, even after searching all morning, he still has not found what he is looking for. While walking through the city, he spots Yui and Claire near a boat, apparently about to head out for a stroll. Yui asks what he is doing, and Dagaz explains that he intends to buy a new shield, since his current one is quite worn out. But he says that he has had no luck so far, since after visiting every weapon shop in the city, he has not found anything. The princess mentions that there's a good shop nearby, even though the place looked quite worn down. Because of that, she is not sure Dagaz will find anything useful there. Still, he decides to go to the place anyway, since it does not hurt to try. When he enters the shop, he finds no one inside, and for a moment he thinks the place is abandoned. However, he soon notices several high-quality weapons hanging on the wall, which convinces him that he is in the right place. A short while later, the shop owner appears and starts shouting, thinking that Dagaz is one of the Hollomen. They are known for causing trouble in the shop, and Dagaz has no idea what the old man is talking about. He says that he only came to take a look, and the old man apologizes for the misunderstanding and allows him to continue examining the items. While Dagaz is analyzing the available shields, a group of men enters the shop. Their leader is called Karen. He starts shouting, demanding that the old man show himself. At that moment, Karen notices Dagaz there and is surprised to see that the place has a customer. In an arrogant tone, he asks if Dagaz is really there to buy something. Dagaz does not understand what those guys want, but confirms that he came to buy a new weapon. As soon as he says that, they all burst out laughing, assuming that Dagaz must be a low-level adventurer for shopping at such a run-down place. At that instant, the shop owner appears, visibly irritated, and Karen grins smugly and asks how business has been going, even though he already knows the answer, since he has been sabotaging the old man whenever he can. From what Dagaz can tell, Karen has been harassing the shop owner, so he decides to intervene. However, Karen's buddies tell him to mind his own business, since Karen isn't a rank adventurer. Supposedly, he is the strongest in the city, which would only be true if there were not an S-rank shield bearer standing right in front of them. Of course, Karen has no idea that Dagaz's rank is S, and he keeps boasting about being a rank. Dagaz then asks what an adventurer of that level is doing threatening an old man. Karen explains that he has been trying to buy an artifact from the shop for some time, but the owner always refuses, saying that he is not worthy and that he cannot draw out the item's full potential. Unwilling to accept the refusal, Karen declares that he will simply beat up the old man until he gets the artifact. Hearing this, Dagaz steps forward and calls him a disgrace to all adventurers for even considering something like that. One of Karen's friends gets angry and tries to punch Dagaz, but the blow is far too weak. Dagaz grabs his arm and twists it behind his back, then pulls his shield out of magical storage, throwing the entire group out of the shop in one go. Karen is completely confused, since he thought Dagaz was just an ordinary adventurer. Calmly, Dagaz shows his adventurer identification and informs them that he is S rank. He says that he could have mentioned it earlier, but he finds it ridiculous to boast about rank, so he did not want to lower himself to their level. After all that, the old man finally makes a decision. He calls Dagaz over and says that there is a favor he would like to ask him. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Lloyd is quite busy working on his magic when the two girls return from their outing. Yui asks what he is doing, and Lloyd explains that he is trying to improve his support spells. He also considers learning some new magic, but he is not sure what to try yet. Yui suggests that Lloyd learn some offensive spells. He replies that he could, but he does not think it would be very useful, since he believes that Silka's attack spells are better than anything he could conjure. For the first time, Yui understands why Lloyd feels inferior in that regard. After all, finding a mage as powerful as Silka is extremely rare. Her magic is definitely no joke. Meanwhile, Silka is in the forest, training her magic. During the last battle, if Lloyd and Claire had not appeared at that moment, she is certain that everyone would have died. She cannot keep depending on Lloyd to save Ishtita, so she has decided to become stronger, and to do that, she will have to refine her spells. She spends the next several hours working on a high-level fire spell, but so far she has not managed to make it work without blowing it up in her own face. Even so, Silka refuses to give up, because she knows that this is part of the learning process. Back at the inn, Lloyd and the others are having some tea, and Yui comments that it is no exaggeration to say that Silka is a genius when it comes to magic. However, what makes her special is not just her raw talent, but the fact that she never gives up until she masters a spell, no matter how difficult or time-consuming it may be. That determination is being demonstrated at that very moment. Silka keeps training and finally manages to make the process work. This time, the spell does not explode in her face, and she becomes very excited when she realizes that she managed to keep her magic under control. Perhaps a bit too excited, she ends up slipping off the rock she was standing on, and the instant she loses her balance, the control over the spell also collapses. A gigantic explosion echoes through the forest. But fortunately, Silka survives, almost completely unharmed. She is also relieved that she did not start a forest fire. Even so, she cannot believe she made such a silly mistake. When she is in public, she always pays close attention to her surroundings. But when she is alone, she ends up lowering her guard too much. Her clothes are practically destroyed, so she decides to end her training there and head back home. However, shortly after, she hears something moving in the bushes. The first thought that comes to her mind is that it might be a monster, which would be terrible, since she has exhausted her mana. Luckily, the one who appears is Dagaz. The two are surprised to see each other there, and Silka asks what Dagaz is doing in the forest, to which he replies that it is a long story. When the old shop owner said he had a favor to ask, he showed Dagaz a magnificent shield, forged by one of the finest dwarven blacksmiths. That shield is known as East's, and Karen had been trying to get his hands on it, since it is capable of blocking any attack, and is almost indestructible. Dagaz immediately realized that it was something very special, but the old man explained that the shield is extremely heavy, and most adventurers would not be able to use it properly. That is why he refused to sell it to that madman, as he could not bear to see such a masterpiece wasted in the hands of an incompetent adventurer. On top of that, Karen was unbearable, so the old man would not sell him the shield, even if he were strong enough. With Dagaz, however, the story is different. The old man says that he is willing to give him the shield. Dagaz is surprised and asks if that is really acceptable, since it is such a valuable item. The old man says yes, but sets one condition. Since that morning, the people of the city have been hearing strange explosions coming from the forest. No one ever had the courage to investigate, so he wanted Dagaz to check what was going on in exchange for the shield. Silka knew the explosions had been loud, but she had no idea they were terrifying so many city residents. Dagaz points at the enormous crater in the ground and says that it is hard not to be scared when spells are capable of causing that level of destruction. After that, Dagaz takes Silka to the old man, and she apologizes repeatedly for all the trouble she caused. The man says that it is all right, since Silka fixed the crater she created, so no permanent damage was done. He tells Dagaz that he can keep the shield, although he says he does not truly deserve it, since it was his friend who caused the commotion. Even so, a promise is a promise, so he decides to hand it over, as he respects Dagaz as an adventurer. Upon returning to the inn, Silka and Dagaz tell everyone everything that happened. Dagaz shows the shield he received, and everyone is amazed that he obtained the legendary shield, and even more surprised to learn that Silka has already mastered her new spell. Yui asks her to do a demonstration later, and seeing Dagaz and Silka grow so much in a single day makes Lloyd want to become even stronger to keep up with them. Cross, on the other hand, feels a bit left out, since he did not do much that day. Yui says there is no need to rush, since everyone will continue to grow stronger. But for now, she declares that it is time to eat and pulls Claire along to go to a restaurant together. The next morning, Cross walks through the city, seriously thinking about what he can do to become stronger. He cannot fall behind the others, but getting a new weapon or training in the forest would not make much of a difference for him, so he does not know exactly what to do. At that moment, a boy bumps into Cross and immediately apologizes. Cross tells him not to worry, since it was nothing, and notices that the boy is wearing an adventurer tag around his neck. So he asks if he is registered with the guild. The boy confirms it, and upon discovering that Cross is also an adventurer, he makes an unexpected request. He asks if Cross would be willing to join his party. Normally, Cross would refuse, but the boy looks so desperate that he cannot say no. Besides, he has some free time, so he decides to go along with him. The boy's name is Lin, and he takes Cross to the city's Adventurers Guild so they can get started. Cross notices that Lin carries a bow and arrows, so he must also be an archer, which makes Cross wonder why Lin is walking around alone, since archers are not suited for solo adventures. Soon, it becomes clear that as soon as they enter the guild, everyone recognizes Lin and starts commenting on how much they pity Cross, since the kid is only going to drag him down. You do not need to be a genius to realize that Lin is a complete disaster with a bow and arrows, so nobody wants to associate with him. Lin apologizes for not mentioning it earlier and reveals that he is rank E. He says he understands if Cross no longer wants to help a loser like him, but Cross replies that he is not leaving. To cheer him up, Cross says that he is also trying to find a way to get stronger, and Lin interprets this as Cross being low rank as well, just like him, and gets excited, saying that now they are low rank brothers. Cross decides not to correct the misunderstanding and suggests that they look for a quest on the notice board. While Cross is busy with Lin, Yu is walking through the city, looking for a famous pastry shop she heard about earlier. At the same time, she starts worrying about gaining weight with everything she has been eating lately. Suddenly, Yu hears a commotion to her right, and when she turns, she sees an arrogant noblewoman yelling at a boy for dirtying her dress with mud. The boy is terrified and apologizes repeatedly, but this is no longer about the dress. The noblewoman just wanted an excuse to make someone her victim, and she orders the guards to take his life, and the smile on that soldier's face is disturbing. He had been waiting for an opportunity to kill someone for a long time. The townspeople know that this is wrong and want to help, but that woman belongs to House Wenji, and if they interfere, they will likely become the next victims. The soldier raises his sword, ready to strike the boy down, but suddenly, Yu tells him to stop. The woman is outraged and demands to know who would dare interfere with the orders of someone as powerful as her. Yu has no idea who that woman is, and honestly, she could not care less. All she sees in front of her is an arrogant, despicable old woman who takes pleasure in oppressing the weak, and that is something she will not tolerate. The noblewoman loses her composure and orders her men to kill Yu first. Without hesitation, they all advance, and Yu tells the boy to run and get out of there while he still has the chance. The moment the guards attack her, she pulls her sword from magical storage to defend herself. The men are confused, since they were sure she was unarmed. Normally, witnessing something like that would already be reason enough to reconsider whether it is worth fighting her, but the noblewoman orders them to continue, and they obey. Meanwhile, Cross and Lin are on that crazy mission. The objective is to eliminate red slimes, and Cross believes that a mission like this should be easy to complete, even with Lin's terrible skill, so he pulls his bow from storage and prepares to shoot. However, he remembers too late that he is pretending to be a low-rank adventurer, and when Lin sees him pulling a weapon out of magical storage, Cross has to come up with an excuse, and says that it is just a basic spell a friend taught him. Without further delay, they set off to eliminate the slime. Cross aims and fires a few arrows, piercing straight through the cores of 3 slime. Lin is amazed by Cross's skill, but Cross tells him he cannot just stand there watching. He needs to try as well. Lin agrees and gives it his best, firing a few arrows, but his aim is terrible. And for those who do not know, this is basically me playing Marvel Rivals. It is literally like this. I miss every shot possible. Anyway, Cross thinks that training him is going to take quite a long time. Back in the city, Yu continues fighting the guards. The noblewoman cannot understand why her men are having so much trouble dealing with a single girl. The crowd then starts to recognize Yu. She is the famous sword prodigy who reached rank S at only 16 years old. When they realize who she really is, everyone understands why the guards cannot defeat her. In fact, it becomes clear that Yu is probably holding back to avoid killing anyone. Yu asks the noblewoman if she is finally ready to give up, but the woman still has a card up her sleeve. She makes a discreet signal, and a mage hidden in the crowd casts a spell. Suddenly, a magic circle appears beneath Yu's feet, and in the next instant, multiple magical chains bind her in place. The chains begin to slowly drain her mana, making it impossible for her to move. The noblewoman orders the guards to finish Yu once and for all. However, all that commotion ends up drawing the attention of a woman who was passing by. She decides to approach and see what is happening, even though she knows that it is not her place to interfere in other people's fights. But she sees that 4 against 1 seems quite fair, so she decides to balance things out. The woman appears to take just a single step, but in the very next instant, all of Nobri's guards collapse unconscious at the same time. Only Yui is able to follow what happened, because in that brief second, the woman passed behind all of the guards and returned to her original position. She was so fast that she probably could have stopped to have a cup of coffee along the way, and no one would have noticed. Unlike Yui, who usually avoids killing people, this woman would have no problem taking a few heads as souvenirs. When she threatens Nobri, the woman faints from sheer terror. With the fight over, Yui thanks the woman for saving her, but also says that she has a small favor to ask. She was impressed by that absurd speed and wants to know how she can become as strong as her. The woman replies that Yui is already incredibly strong for her age, and that there is no reason to rush. But Yui says that she has her reasons. She explains that there is a white mage named Lloyd in her group, someone who is unbelievably strong, and she wants to become stronger so she will not be a burden to him. The woman is surprised to hear the name Lloyd and realizes that Yui must be the leader of the group Merlin mentioned. The woman reveals that she is a former member of Merlin's group, becomes interested in Yui, and agrees to train her a little. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Lloyd keeps racking his brain non-stop, trying to optimize his spells. The others start to worry about him, and they suggest that he take a short break, since pushing himself like that is not very healthy. Claire then offers to take a walk around the city with him. As for Yui, she is now in the forest with the woman, who finds it a bit concerning that Yui followed a stranger, but she goes along with it without hesitation. Yui says that it is fine, because she feels that she is not a bad person, but she would like to know her name. The woman hesitates, since she does not want to reveal her true identity, and in the end decides to give a false name and call herself Lilith. The long pause before her answer makes Lilith even more suspicious, but Yui continues to believe that she is a good person, and intends to learn as much as possible from her. Speaking of learning, Cross is there trying to teach Lin how to use a bow properly. After some instructions, Lin manages to at least graze one of the slimes, which is already enormous progress. Cross asks him to try aiming for the core next time, and Lin agrees. Pulling the bow once again, he manages to hit the slime's core. Cross is genuinely surprised, because he thought Lin was completely hopeless at first, but he realizes that he learns quite quickly. As for Yui's training, Lilith says she will give her the first lesson, and that lesson is to knock down that tree. That seems very simple, until Lilith adds that Yui must do it without moving her feet. Yui thinks it must be a joke, but Lilith demonstrates the technique and knocks the tree down with a single strike. She explains that all it takes is to wrap the sword in mana and strike with full force. That will work. Excited, Yui prepares to try it. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Claire are having a small snack while soaking their feet in the hot springs. Lloyd is happy to finally have the chance to take a break from his magical research. But speaking of magic, there is something he has wanted to ask Claire for a while. First of all, he wants to confirm whether the magic she used to control the monsters was ancient magic. Claire becomes tense because she did not expect Lloyd to reach that conclusion, but admits that yes, it was ancient magic. This confirms Lloyd's suspicions, since something that powerful could not have been developed in the modern era. Then he asks a second question. Would it be possible for him to learn that kind of magic, since it could help him in his research? Claire replies that it is not possible. A user of ancient magic is born only once every several centuries. When a compatible child is born, anyone who tries to use it without the innate talent suffers devastating backlash. There are even records of a man who saved a village using ancient magic and ended up dying because of it. Because of that, Claire asks Lloyd not to get involved with something like that. Back to Cross and Lynn, they finally manage to eliminate all the slimes and complete the mission. It would have been done much faster if Cross could reload his bow instantly, but that is one of the natural limitations of an archer. Cross says that now they should collect the materials from the slimes, but at that moment, Lynn spots a giant spider. It is a high-level monster, so Lynn suggests that they run away immediately. The problem is that if they do that, the spider will devour all the materials they collected with so much effort. Cross refuses to let all of that go to waste and fires an arrow at the spider's head. But a single shot is not enough to injure it, so Lynn gets an idea and tells Cross to try firing rapid shots. Cross tries to say that this is not possible, but Lynn tells him to be quiet for a second and starts using the storage spell more actively. Cross had never even thought about that before, but decides to try it. After firing an arrow, he immediately uses storage to summon another arrow in its place, completely eliminating the reload time. With that, he manages to pierce through the spider's carapace. As for Yui's training, she spent the entire day practicing the mana strike, but simply cannot master it. Lilith notices that she is pushing herself to the limit, but thinks that maybe she lacks a bit of motivation, so she allows herself to be attacked by a panther that was prowling the area, forcing Yui to intervene to save her. In that moment of desperation, Yui finally manages to execute the technique successfully. She becomes extremely happy that she succeeded, but the intense training completely exhausts her, and a few moments later she faints, forcing Lilith to catch her before she falls to the ground. That night, Lloyd and the others are sitting around the table and begin to worry, since Yui still has not returned. Suddenly, Lloyd hears a noise at the front door and goes to check. When he opens it, he sees Yui collapse, and farther down the street, it is possible to see Lilith quietly disappearing into the darkness of the night. The next morning, the group prepares to resume their journey, but Lloyd looks visibly downcast. He feels bad because everyone else learned incredible abilities, while he, in his own view, only managed to optimize his spells, learning some new offensive spells for large-scale battles and developing an original search spell. Somehow, in Lloyd's mind, none of that is as impressive as what the others accomplished, and the group is already getting really tired of how he constantly belittles himself, just like we are. Meanwhile, in the demon world, after the failure of the plan to conquer that city, the demon general is forced to report the disaster directly to the demon king. The king is deeply disappointed in the general, since the monster army was supposed to be the foundation of the invasion of the human world. He regrets having placed so much trust in the general, but now it is already too late to devise another plan. Therefore, the demon king orders the general to locate Claire and resume the invasion plan. Otherwise, he will be stripped of his position. With little choice, the general accepts the order, but he has no idea how to find Claire. At that moment, the Conj appears before him, visibly irritated at having been abandoned as soon as the plan failed. The general almost strangles him in rage, but the Conj asks him to wait, saying that he has valuable information. He reveals that Claire is on her way to the royal capital, escorted by a group of S-rank adventurers. The Conj also offers help in trying to capture her, claiming that he wants to make up for having fled earlier. With few options, the general accepts the proposal, and meanwhile, Lloyd and the others continue traveling, with the tension running high. Everyone moves into combat position when a simple rabbit jumps out of a bush. Lloyd performs a quick scan and tells them they can relax, since there are no demons in the area. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief, but the scare left them nervous, so they decide to take a short break to calm down, resting in the shade of the trees, and Lloyd notices that he is smiling a lot and asks why. Lloyd replies that he feels happy when the others grow stronger, and Yu already imagines where this is going and directly asks about Lloyd's own progress. As expected, he says that he has been working hard, but still needs to improve a lot so he does not become a burden to the group. This is already the 100th time they have talked to Lloyd about this, and he still does not seem to understand. Yu then asks him to remember the celebration held in his honor in the city, and Lloyd admits that he now knows he is not a complete incompetent, but still believes he could do more to keep up with the others. The others reveal the truth. They are training like madmen just to reach Lloyd's level. He tries to say that his abilities are nothing compared to his master's. Although the others do not know exactly who this master is, Claire states with absolute certainty that, from what she has seen so far, Lloyd is the most powerful person in the group, and Yu says that he needs to start recognizing his own worth, because if he keeps underestimating himself, he will never be able to draw out his full potential in battle. Lloyd does not follow everything perfectly, but understands the message and promises to try to be more confident from now on. Meanwhile, the person responsible for all of Lloyd's self-esteem problems is currently in the royal capital, searching for an old friend. Her search leads her to a royal castle, but the guards stop her from entering, saying that only authorized individuals may pass. Merlin could easily turn invisible or fly over the wall, but instead, she uses magic to put the guards to sleep and calmly enters the castle. Before long, she reaches a library that catches her attention, but all of it is nothing more than an elaborate illusion. She walks toward the back wall and with a simple gesture dispels the illusory magic, revealing a secret door. Before she can knock, Lowen appears to welcome her. Lowen immediately recognizes her by the pleasant scent of her mana. She says that it is good to see her again. The two sit down to have some tea, and Lowen begins by explaining that the former son of the Demon King now rules the demon magocracy, but they have kept a low profile in recent years, leaving the situation relatively calm. Merlin comments that the Emperor must like Lowen very much, since he allows her to use the castle's library as a research laboratory. Lowen explains that things ended up that way when she tried to imitate some of Merlin's magic. Merlin says there is nothing about her worth imitating, but Lowen disagrees and reminds her that it was Merlin who originally developed the storage magic technique, as well as casting countless spells without incantations, all thanks to her personal analysis of ancient magic. Merlin replies that those innovations were necessary to defeat the Demon King. Speaking of that, she asks Lowen to examine a book. It is only one half of an original grimoire, but Merlin wants to know if it still has the power to seal the Demon King. Lowen asks whether Merlin believes the Demon King might attack. For now, it is only a possibility, but Merlin wants to be prepared in case it happens. And back to Lloyd's group, they continue moving forward at a good pace. They should arrive at the City of Shores within the next few hours. From there, it will be just one more day of travel to the capital. Claire begins to feel a bit uneasy, since nightfall is approaching. If they do not leave the forest before then, they could end up being attacked by monsters. Croix thinks this will not be a problem, since Claire has the power to control monsters, but she reminds him that the spell still takes some time to activate. If they are caught by surprise, she would not have enough time to cast it. To be safe, Lloyd decides to perform a quick scan of the area to confirm that there are no monsters nearby. However, when he tries to cast his spell, he realizes that something is very wrong. Something is interfering with his magic, and a dense fog begins to spread around the group. Everyone realizes that this does not seem like a good sign, and Silka says she can disperse the fog using a wind spell. However, when she tries to draw her staff, she realizes that the fog itself is interfering with that. This is definitely not a coincidence, so everyone concludes that it can only be the work of demons. But fighting under these conditions would be extremely dangerous, so their best option is to run straight to Shores and seek shelter in the city. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, Lowen has just finished analyzing the grimoire and informs Merlin that it still has mana in it. However, it is only residual traces of Sibiu's magic. Merlin feels relieved upon hearing that, because it means there is still a chance, and that alone is enough for her. Then Merlin tells Lowen about the fact that Lloyd has the potential to become a chosen one, just as she and Sibiu were in the past. The reason Merlin is so certain of this is an incident that happened when Lloyd was a child. He accidentally touched the grimoire, and the instant he did, the book reacted. That could only mean one thing: Lloyd was compatible with that magic. When Merlin realized that Lloyd was a chosen one, she decided to raise him so that he would become stronger than she and Sibiu ever were. To achieve that, she began imposing tasks on him beyond his capacity. It was a very effective strategy to force his growth. But now Merlin acknowledges that excessive training and constant belittlement are not appropriate ways to raise a child, and she is glad that she wrote that down. Eventually, Lloyd left home, and now he is part of an S-rank adventurer group, escorting the Beast Princess. It has been a very long time since Merlin last saw Lloyd, and she misses him greatly. That is one of the main reasons she came to the capital, so that she can talk to him as soon as he arrives. Meanwhile, alongside Lloyd, they have just arrived in a city. However, for some reason, the place seems strangely empty. The fog there is a bit less dense, so Lloyd manages to strengthen Silka's mana enough for her to be able to summon her staff. As soon as she has it in her hands, she uses wind magic to disperse the remaining fog. When visibility improves, the group sees several demons gathered in the center of the city. Claire immediately recognizes Grist as the one responsible for kidnapping her in the past, and it becomes clear that he has come to capture her once again. Lloyd tells the others to prepare for combat and assigns daggers to protect Claire, while Cross provides long-range cover from a tower. The rest will confront Grist's troops directly. Yui starts by using her mana strike, eliminating several demons at once. Silka would love to use her blazing explosion to annihilate the rest, but that would likely injure her allies as well, so she decides to hold back and fire only a few standard fireballs. Fortunately, Cross makes up for the lack of destructive power, taking down several demons with his shots. However, when he tries to hit Grist, his arrows simply ricochet without causing any damage. Yui charges forward to try to defeat him with another mana strike, but Grist barely moves and continues straight toward Claire. Daggers blocks Grist's attack, and Yui tries to take the opening to strike him from behind. However, when her sword comes down, it does not make contact with the target for some reason. Lloyd realizes that Grist is using mana as armor, protecting himself from both physical and magical attacks. Grist is impressed that Lloyd noticed this so quickly and concludes that he must have been responsible for interfering with the attack on Ishtar. Grist leaps into the air, preparing to attack Lloyd. Because of the distance, this gives Silka the perfect opportunity to strike him with her new magic, the Blazing Explosion. It is the most powerful spell she possesses. Even so, it fails to break through Grist's mana armor. He remains virtually unharmed, and the group begins to run out of options. The remaining demons start to surround them, and suddenly ice magic erupts from the ground, completely freezing all the demons in the area. The one responsible is the ice hero, Thurian. He introduces himself, saying that he came to ensure Claire's safety. Meanwhile, on a nearby cliff, the Count begins to worry about the possibility of his plan failing once again. Because of that, he prepares to create even more magic-suppressing fog. But before he can do so, he is interrupted by Will. The Count is surprised that Will managed to find him at such a height and asks what he wants. Will replies that the fog he is creating is extremely inconvenient, so he came to cut off the source of the problem. Back in the city, Thurian jumps down to where the others are and bluntly says that they are ridiculously weak for S-rank adventurers, though he acknowledges that at least they managed to keep Claire safe until now. Claire runs up to him excitedly, and when Lloyd asks who he is, she explains that he is a childhood friend of hers, Thurian, the ice hero. The others are surprised to learn that Thurian is the hero, and Lloyd asks if that means he is an emissary sent to retrieve Claire, but that is not the case. In fact, Thurian technically should not even be there. He simply could not bear the idea of leaving Claire's safety in the hands of a bunch of mediocre adventurers. Claire scolds Thurian, saying that he does not need to speak that way to the people who saved her life. It is clear that he has a soft spot for her, so he calms down for the moment. At that moment, Christy manages to break free from Thurian's ice. He tells everyone to step back, saying that he will handle this alone. He launches another ice attack against Christy, but the strike has almost no effect. It becomes clear that if Thurian wants to win, he will have to take this fight seriously. Christy is quite impressed by Thurian's abilities, since he is casting magic without incantations and even using his own body as a catalyst without freezing himself. Thurian explains that his body has had a natural affinity for ice magic since birth, but says there is no reason to go into details since Christy is going to die anyway. Next, Thurian creates a massive block of ice and hurls it at Christy. The attack finally scares him enough to force him to dodge, confirming that he can still be damaged. Thurian fires a devastating blast of ice, forcing Christy to move frantically to evade it. However, Lloyd notices something strange about Christy's fist. He quickly realizes that he is preparing a concentrated mana strike. Knowing how destructive that technique is, Lloyd warns everyone to protect themselves, but it is already too late for Thurian. Christy has already closed the distance, and Thurian can only respond with a punch wrapped in ice. The collision generates an explosion so violent that it can be felt even from the top of the cliff. Thurian had no idea that Christy was hiding a trick like that. The attack caught him completely by surprise, and while he was recovering, the Count managed to escape. Back in the city, Lloyd checks to see if everyone is alright. He can still sense the consciousness of the group members, but he cannot find any sign of Claire or Thurian. He begins searching for them desperately, until he sees something rising into the sky. Christy is holding Claire in his arms, already aboard an airship, ready to flee. Thurian gets back on his feet and tries to chase after them, creating a pillar of ice beneath his feet. He nearly manages to reach Claire, but ice is not meant to support such an altitude, so the structure collapses. Thurian falls into free fall, while Christy escapes with Claire in his arms. Even for Thurian, that fall could be fatal, but Lloyd shouts for Silka to use an air cushion. Thanks to Lloyd's quick reaction, Thurian manages to land safely. Still, Christy has taken Claire, and Thurian desperately wants to pursue them again. Lloyd stops him, saying that the airship is already too high and there is no way to reach it now. The best option is to leave this to him. Thurian is offended by the idea that Lloyd believes he can save Claire better than he can, but the others remind him that he just tried and failed. Besides, if it were not for Lloyd's quick orders, Thurian would have been smashed into the ground. With few options left, Thurian agrees to trust Lloyd, as long as he is not held back. Lloyd thanks him for the trust and says that he has a perfect plan to rescue Claire, but that it will require a great deal of Thurian's power. Meanwhile, aboard the airship, Christie praises the Count for the impressive construction of the vessel. He wonders why the Count did not use it during the attack on Ishtar, but the Count replies that this is only a prototype and that this is the first time the ship has actually flown. This makes Christie quite nervous, but the Count reassures him, saying there is no risk of sudden failure, since he has finally secured the perfect power source, a fragment of the former Demon King's body. Christie is astonished and asks for an explanation. The Count explains that after the defeat of the former Demon King, his body was completely destroyed, but through his malice, he managed to recover a fragment that still held power. By analyzing its life force, he was able to extract an almost infinite amount of mana. Christie is horrified to realize that the Count is essentially draining energy from the soul of the former Demon King, and even worse, he seems quite proud of it. Still, that is exactly the kind of thing a demon would do. The Count says that he wants to witness the truly interesting things of this world, especially extremely powerful monsters, and that the idea of having them all under his command deeply excites him. Christie looks at the Count with absolute disgust, and at that moment, he realizes that this bastard is even more insane than he is. Before the Count can say anything else atrocious, the alarm sounds. The two look at the monitors and see Lloyd approaching along with the others. They manage to reach the airship using Thurian's ice, combined with the anti-adhesion magic Lloyd learned recently. He still needs to refine a few details since the range is limited, but it is perfect for this situation. The group boards the airship and demands that Claire be released immediately. Christie rushes to the upper deck to face them, and is impressed by their persistence. However, he has no intention of letting Claire go and charges in to attack. In a fraction of a second, Lloyd casts a strengthening spell on everyone at once. They manage to dodge Christie's attack, but when Thurian tries to counterattack, his ice sword shatters upon contact. Christie's mana armor remains as resilient as ever. Even so, Lloyd already has a plan. While Christie is distracted, he casts a small spell on him. Then Lloyd signals for everyone to attack together, and they charge with everything they have, forcing Christie to activate his mana armor repeatedly. Despite this, very little progress is made, and Thurian ends up being thrown against a wall. Christie smiles, mocking the fact that they truly believe they could defeat him with such weak attacks. But Thurian replies coldly that they never expected those attacks to pierce his defense. Christie does not understand what Thurian means, but he does not care, and he moves in to finish the fight, once again preparing a concentrated mana strike. However, Daggers steps in front just in time to block the attack, and in the next instant, something strange happens. Christie's arm freezes completely and then shatters into dozens of fragments. Christie is left in shock by what has just happened, because no direct attack was made against him. Thurian then explains that it was not a normal strike, but the result of extreme freezing. Earlier, Lois had cast a spell that suppressed Christie's sense of pain, preventing him from noticing that his body was gradually freezing. As for how Thurian managed to freeze him, from the very beginning of the fight, he had been continuously releasing a steady flow of cold energy toward Christie. Normally, this would have been blocked by the mana armor, but since Christie was too busy defending himself from the other attacks, he failed to notice that his body was slowly freezing from the inside. Everything went exactly as Lois had planned, and now Christie has lost an arm and stands no chance against Lloyd and the others. Lloyd demands that Christie return Claire immediately. Overcome with panic in the face of his imminent defeat, Christie turns around and flees to the lower deck of the airship. As soon as he arrives there, he orders the Count to release all the monsters kept in the cages. The Count is somewhat shocked by the request, as he had already been warned that those creatures were extremely dangerous, and that the control system was not yet complete. Releasing them now would be a disastrous idea, but Christie is already tampering with the cage mechanism. Soon, Lloyd and the others reach the area, and as soon as Thurian sees Claire, he demands that she be released. In response, Christie simply opens the cages, releasing all the captured monsters. He orders the creatures to attack Lloyd and his group. One of the serpents even attacks Christie himself. As the Count had mentioned earlier, the control was not fully perfected, so the monsters obey no one. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Count had prepared a special prototype, designed precisely for this kind of emergency. He takes the item and activates a magic crystal, releasing a sound wave that controls the monster's mind. The creatures freeze in place for a moment, and Thurian takes the opportunity to run toward Claire. He reaches her cage and breaks it by freezing the structure. However, in the meantime, the Count begins ordering the monsters to attack once again, and escaping from there will not be easy. Everyone prepares to fight, but before the battle begins, Claire stops them. She does not want innocent monsters to be harmed. Claire says she can handle it alone and begins to sing, using her ancient magic. A few moments later, the monsters freeze completely. The effect takes about 30 seconds to fully complete. The Count could have tried to stop her, but he was fascinated by witnessing ancient magic up close and could only think about recording Claire's song. While Claire is singing, something unexpected happened. The life force of the Demon King, Freeman, begins to react violently. Suddenly, the airship starts to lose stability. The Count realizes that something is terribly wrong and panics. At this point, the ship is at risk of falling from the sky. At first, he thinks the monsters might be the cause, but soon realizes that this is not the case. Earlier, during the turbulence, Grit stumbled and accidentally activated the compartment that stored the fragment of the Demon King. Something happened at that moment, and his mind simply went blank. The Count concludes that Claire's ancient magic caused the Demon King's life force to spiral out of control. If nothing is done, the fragment will explode, destroying the entire airship. Quickly, the Count removes the fragment from the engine, neutralizing the immediate risk of explosion. However, the fragment was the ship's power source, and without it, the airship begins to plummet. Thanks to Lojo's gravitational magic, everyone remains steady, even as the ship enters free fall. But then, something even worse happens. Grit writhes in pain for several seconds. Soon after, he stands up with completely empty eyes and begins demanding that the fragment of the Demon King be handed over to him. The Count reflects for a moment and realizes that Grit has likely become a compatible vessel for demonic power. If he hands over the fragment now, something truly interesting will happen. Excited, he throws the fragment directly at Grit's head. Within seconds, a black sphere of energy envelops his body, and the energy begins to absorb all the surrounding monsters, draining their life forces. Inside the sphere, the Demon King Freeman begins to awaken. Using Grit's body as a vessel, Claire falls to her knees in despair upon hearing hundreds of monsters being drained. A short time later, the energy sphere explodes in a flash of light, revealing a grotesque abomination, formed by the fusion of Grit with all the other absorbed monsters. Lloyd recognizes the creature immediately. He had read about it in one of Merlin's books. It is an echimera, a monster that houses multiple lives within a single body. Claire is devastated upon seeing so many innocent creatures reduced to something so terrible. Kond, on the other hand, is in ecstasy. It has surpassed everything he could have imagined. However, he is far too excited, and Kond gets too close to the creature. The echimera attacks him and splits him in half with a single strike. Even on the brink of death, Kond can only think about how fascinating that creature is. He dies seconds later, but he dies smiling. Lloyd and the others are shocked that someone could die that way. But there is no time to reflect. Now they must face the echimera, and if they fail to come up with a good plan, they will end up like Kond. They will be dead meat. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, Merlin and Lloyd walk through the castle corridors. Lloyd asks if Merlin intends to spend the night there, but Merlin replies that there is not enough alcohol in that place and that she becomes depressed if she does not drink at night, so she plans to go to a local tavern. At that moment, both of them notice Will standing near the entrance. Lloyd beams when she sees him, as it has been a long time since their last meeting, but she cannot help wondering how exactly he managed to get past the guards. Will says there is no reason to worry about that right now, because he has something extremely important to discuss with them. Merlin immediately senses the seriousness of the matter and asks Lloyd if they can return to her room to talk more calmly. Back on the airship, the group is about to face the echimera, so Daggers steps forward to the front line. He protects everyone, and Lloyd reinforces his defense with strengthening magic. Then, when the echimera attacks, Daggers manages to block the blow without being torn apart. Even so, if this continues, he will not be able to hold out for long. To make matters worse, the airship continues in free fall, and it is only a matter of time before it crashes into the ground. Lloyd appears strangely calm, but the others begin to panic. Cross says they need to abandon the ship immediately, and Claire objects, saying she does not want to abandon the creatures, since they were all forced to become that thing. Thurian says it is already too late to save them, and the group begins moving toward the exit. But before they can escape, The Chimera blocks their path, trapping everyone inside. Thurian loses his patience and creates an ice sword, preparing to cut the creature in half, but Claire, as always being a nuisance, begs him not to hurt the monster. The others understand that Claire cares about innocent monsters, but this is a matter of life and death. They need to take it down as soon as possible, and that is the logical decision. Yu and Cross attack with everything they have, but nothing seems to work. Only a few minutes remain before impact with the ground, and the situation is getting worse by the second. Meanwhile, Merlin and Will teleport to the forest in search of Lloyd and the group. After a quick scan, Merlin locates the airship descending toward a canyon and informs Will as she teleports them both to intercept the group. Inside the airship, panic spreads as the ground draws closer, but the Chimera still blocks the escape route. Silka even tries to push it back with wind magic, but the monster disperses the spell as if it were nothing. Lloyd briefly considers jumping out the window, but realizes that all the openings are far too small. However, as he observes the terrain outside, he notices something crucial. The airship is tilted toward the ground, and the only reason everyone can still stand is because of the gravitational magic he cast earlier. So he decides to use that to his advantage and orders everyone to press against the wall and put away their weapons. Despite not understanding the plan, everyone obeys, trusting Lloyd. As soon as everyone is in position, he cancels the gravitational magic. At that very instant, everyone inside the airship begins sliding down the tilted floor, including the Chimera. This creates the perfect opening, and while the monster struggles to regain its footing, Thurian grabs Claire, and everyone runs toward the exit. Realizing their escape, the Chimera launches a combined blast of wind and fire to try to stop them. But Lloyd reacts in time, creating a magical barrier that blocks the attack. Everyone emerges unharmed, but the airship continues to fall, so they are still not safe yet. Lloyd asks Thurian to create an ice platform so they can leave the ship. Thurian begins to conjure it, but before he can finish, the Chimera interrupts. It comes from the deck, shrouded in flames, and the heat is so intense that it instantly melts the ice. The escape route is blocked, leaving only one option. Lloyd grabs Yui and Silka and shouts for everyone to jump immediately. Croyd protests, saying this is madness, since there is nowhere to land. But if they do nothing, an impact will be inevitable anyway. Trusting Lloyd, everyone jumps, and as they fall, Lloyd asks Thurian to create an ice slab beneath their feet. As soon as the platform forms, everyone manages to stand on it. But even so, the falling speed is absurd, and the ground is rapidly approaching. Silka then says she will use air pressure magic to slow the descent. Lloyd reinforces her with a support spell. At the very last second, Silka manages to drastically reduce the platform's speed, giving everyone enough time to jump away before the ice shatters against the ground. They are finally safe, and the group sighs in relief, knowing they only survived thanks to the quick thinking of Lloyd and Silka. Everyone thanks them, and Thurian, for his part, is left speechless. He had always believed that teamwork was something for the weak, but now he knows he would never have survived without Lloyd. Shortly afterward, the airship crashes into the ground and explodes into a massive fireball. Fortunately, they managed to escape in time. However, the Chimera was still aboard during the fall. Claire looks visibly devastated, believing that all the innocent souls trapped within the creature were destroyed. But seconds later, a deafening roar echoes through the wreckage, to everyone's shock. The Chimera emerges unharmed from the debris. They can hardly believe it survived the impact. The creature looks furious and clearly ready to attack once again. Lloyd orders everyone to run into the forest and use the terrain as cover. At the same time, Merlin and Will teleport to a nearby mountain. Merlin clearly senses Lloyd's presence, but sees him hiding in the forest with his companions, which leaves her very confused. Meanwhile, Lloyd's group is desperate, since they have never faced anything like this before. But Lloyd begins to form a theory. When Claire used her ancient magic on the airship to calm the monsters, part of the Count's magic reacted to it. It was right after that moment that Christo began acting strangely, and Lloyd remembers him mentioning the fragment of the Demon King. Everything points to the awakened fragment searching for a body to allow the resurrection of the Demon King. That is exactly why it absorbed all those monsters beforehand. That said, Lloyd still does not understand why the monster is pursuing the group so obsessively. Then he suggests that it is after Claire, because even after the transformation, Christo's mind likely still exists inside it. The only thing he wanted was to capture her. And if that is the case, Then even if they manage to lose it for a while, the Chimera will never stop chasing them as long as Claire is alive. Thurian states that the only remaining option is to kill it. Claire, however, cannot bear the idea of harming the monsters trapped within that creature. Thinking of her, Silka asks Lloyd if he can imagine any way to defeat the Chimera without killing it. Lloyd says he has an idea, but that it is extremely risky. He proposes that if Claire sings while using a strengthening magic, it might be possible to transmit her feelings directly to the fragment of the Demon King, forcing it to return to normal. The others do not seem very confident in this idea. After all, the plan basically amounts to Claire saying, "Hey man, calm down. Still, this is the only way to avoid killing the creature." So Claire agrees. Before they can act, Merlin suddenly appears and tells Lloyd that he cannot do this, since ancient magic is far too dangerous. Lloyd is surprised to see her there. She continues, saying that he should not get involved with this kind of magic. Lloyd replies that he understands the risks, but firmly states that he knows his own strength and can handle it. Merlin, irritated, reminds him that she warned him never to become arrogant, as that could lead him to ruin. But Lloyd counters that he is not being arrogant, only acknowledging his capabilities. He knows he is far from surpassing Merlin, but now that his friends need him, he knows he cannot back down. Lloyd and the group run past Merlin, and she is so shaken by his words that she simply lets them go. Even as she tries to convince herself that Lloyd's use of ancient magic will not cause another tragedy, she cannot shake her fear. The battle begins. While Thurian distracts the creature with barrages of ice spikes, Lloyd advances, driving his staff into the Chimera's torso and prepares to support Claire's song. He asks her to begin singing and then starts modifying the spell in real time, enhancing its effectiveness. The strain is immense, but soon the absorbed monsters begin to be expelled from the Chimera's body. The plan is working, and suddenly Lloyd realizes something terrible. A black portal opens behind him. By the time the others realize what is happening, Lloyd is already being pulled into the portal. Merlin recognizes it immediately. It is the side effect of using ancient magic without being a legitimate heir. Before anyone can react, Lloyd disappears completely, and if nothing is done, Merlin fears that Lloyd will be trapped there forever. Inside, Lloyd finds himself in a completely white space, and beside him, Christ's body begins to disintegrate. Then he notices something even stranger. His own body is floating in front of him. Confused, Lloyd hears a voice calling out to him. The voice explains that his mind has been separated from his body, and that is why there are two Lloyds there. When he asks if this is a consequence of ancient magic, the voice begins to explain what it truly is. Ancient magic was left behind by beings who transcended human understanding. They were able to manipulate reality, and there are spells capable of defying the natural order of the world. However, the world soon collapsed because of that power, so they sealed ancient magic away, allowing its use only by natural heirs. In addition, they cast a spell over the entire world. Anyone who attempted to use ancient magic without proper inheritance would have their mana spiral out of control and be destroyed. The voice then introduces itself as Sybil, the ancient healer of Merlin's group of heroes. He is the only man in history who managed to use ancient magic without being an heir. In the final battle against the Demon King, victory was close, but the Demon King self-destructed, annihilating everyone around him, including Sybil, along with the entire group of heroes and an entire city. Merlin blames herself for this to this day, because she failed to foresee that attack. In the final moment of his life, Sybil used forbidden ancient magic to bend the boundary between life and death, reviving everyone who had died at the cost of his own life. Sybil says that it is already too late for him to return, but there is still time for Lloyd. The rift between the two worlds has not yet closed. Lloyd asks how he can escape, and Sybil tells him that he only needs to think about the people he wishes to return to. At that moment, Lloyd begins to hear the voices of his friends calling out to him. Without hesitation, he dives toward the portal, and Sybil's image disappears completely. Outside, everyone falls into despair as they see the portal closing with no sign of Lloyd. But at the very last second, Lloyd reappears behind them, and the entire group rushes to embrace him, relieved and emotional. Back in the capital, Yui still cannot believe that Lloyd's master was the legendary, great, and wise Merlin. Now everything makes sense. If Lloyd was constantly comparing himself to her, it is only natural that he never realized how exceptional he truly was. For their outstanding performance, the group receives an enormous reward from the king, as well as a mansion in the royal capital. which indicates that they will be staying there for quite some time. At that moment, Lloyd notices Lohen sniffing him. She comments that he has a very pleasant scent, which is a compliment, but also a little unsettling. Merlin explains that Lohen is an old friend and is able to distinguish mana through her sense of smell. Suddenly, the room grows silent. It is not hard to understand why, since for most adventurers, Merlin is practically a deity. She approaches Lloyd and asks if he would consider living with her again. Lloyd looks at his friends and realizes that he could not leave them behind. He says that he wants to continue as an adventurer in the capital, researching magic on his own. Besides that, living with Merlin can be a bit complicated at times, so he prefers to stay where he is. And with that, we bring this video to a close. I hope you enjoyed it. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below if I was not the only one who felt annoyed with this protagonist several times throughout this story. That is it, everyone. Take care, stay well, and see you in the next video.